We are always plagued with the question, why am I here and who am I? Imagine there's this massive puzzle on the wall and it represents the whole universe. No matter how beautiful it is, if there was one piece missing, where would your eyes immediately go? Every human being alive is one of those puzzle pieces. And when we answer those questions and we live as that person, the piece is fulfilled.
So how do you balance that with a focus on what's not right?
People are always focusing on what's wrong, not with what's right or good. And that's enough to drive you to need to medicate yourself. Angeles Arian, she was a shaman and she was an anthropologist. And she identified 4 primary causes of addiction. 1 is perfectionism. 2 is intensity. The greater the level of intensity in the environment a child is raised in, the higher likelihood of addiction. Next, focusing on what's wrong. Finally, the need to know. I have to know more in order to be wanted, needed, valued, and loved. And those are the 4 main things that we have to overcome in Spirit Gym to have freedom. One of the premises of Spirit Gym is you must take responsibility for your own quest of I am, who you are and why you're here, or you will always be a sheep in a herd and will always produce pain because God built a failsafe into his plan or into her plan or into its plan, and that's what I call the pain teacher. The pain teacher will always come to awaken a sleeping God so that it goes deeper, so that it looks more carefully, and that's one of the reasons there's so much pain in the world.
Since we just had a little of the smoke,
Yeah.
and I had mentioned I kind of dipped into abuse with the volcano, with Hoppe, with caffeine, whatever it was, it got into abuse. And I'm curious to know your thoughts on, you're like, well, I've got, kind of coached people through how to kind of rebuild that relationship. So I'm curious about that. I'm also curious about your thoughts around blue light. And as I've come to understand, it really kind of saps our dopamine. And so we go to these other things to get that dopamine hit. And so for me, it seemed like all these things that I was dependent on for that, when I was, I would say, just unhealthy in general of mind. And I mean, people would look at me and not think that, but I know how I felt. And you know, those natural chi levels that you and I were talking about before we got on were at a minimum.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll do the first one first. You know, it's easy to put it, there's a lot of ways I can attack this one, but look, when people don't have a dream that's big enough to create enough levity to overcome the inertia that's inherent to life, then what one naturally does is look to create wormholes into an alternate reality where there's a sense of freedom or a sense of joy or a sense of less stress or the ability to forget about the weight of being you in the state that your choices have created you, consciously or unconsciously. So psychologist Jerry Wesh says, if you have a big enough dream, you don't need a crisis. And I think that's extremely true. But to really share with you what I share with my many clients that are having these kinds of challenges, and how I keep myself from having these challenges, because I'm a guy that loves everything. I mean, I love plant medicines. I mean, I remember the first time I did LSD, I thought, oh my God, this is my bloodstream. This is who I am. I felt like I was me on LSD. And that led to about 100 LSD journeys. Now, I wasn't doing LSD stupidly. I was doing it as part of my research, but I always had to grapple with this sense of, why is it that I feel more truly myself on LSD than I do any other time? And, you know, one of the things I realized is that the LSD was opening up my creativity and it was helping me experience myself the way I imagined I should be. But then it made me ask, well, what's in the way of me being that person all the time? So it brought me deeper into self-reflection so that I could, and this is why I do, professionally run ceremonies, so that there is a day of preparation, a day of ceremony, and a day of integration where we say, okay, what came up in the journey and how does that relate to what's going on in your life? Be that your physical body, your digestion, your elimination, your relationship with your spouse, your relationship with money, sex, whatever is going on. And there's always stuff going on or they wouldn't be seeing me. But my point is that we're all living in a very challenging and stressful world, which is why I call my program Spirit Gem, because people don't realize that. Now, this gets a bit deep and we can come back to this later so I can answer your question. But, in the beginning of my myth section, in my book, the volume 1 that's about to come out, my soul speaks to me and gives me things that are important to know. And my soul, speaking of myth, said, God is the myth maker that plays both sides, but chooses neither. Choice is always left to you. And what I learned from, my whole life of investigating this thing called God is that God cannot know itself without equally investing itself in the light and the dark of itself. You can't know love without its opposite. You can't know north without south. You can't know good without evil. Inside has to have outside. And God can't be a puritanical being, or it will never create consciousness, because you cannot have consciousness without opposites. Edward Edinger, a famous Jungian analyst, says consciousness is a psychic substance produced not blindly, but in living awareness of opposites. And God being that for which there is no other, or the only being that can create and sustain itself. If you think about it, even the devil cannot create and sustain itself, or it would be God. And that's the problem. That's another story. The devil's big problem is it can never be God. So it's always trying to be. And it can't, because it can't sustain itself and it can't create itself. So it's constantly trapped. And so what I'm really pointing to here is that we are each the embodiment of source. This is why it says in the Bible, as much as I do not like the Bible, there are some great wisdom tips in there. And it says, man is created in his likeness, referring to God, and everything that is in nature, the natural qualities of God are inherent in the human being, which is to dive into everything, right? And it takes a long time to wake up to the power that we have of choice. And so what we end up doing is, unfortunately, doing what we're programmed to do by family, by religion, by society, which is almost always driven by fear. And so we're always trying to run away from whatever we think's bad. I got to have enough money that I don't have to have poverty, or I got to have enough success that people love me, or I've got to look a certain way to get attention, or I've got to drive a certain car, have a certain status, or practice a certain religion to fit into the in group or a political party, So we're always inherently running from fear until we reach a level of our spiritual awakening where we realize that, most of what we're afraid of is actually false evidence appearing real. Some of it's real, but when you think of how many things that you were afraid of that never actually happened, right? How many people thought that when the lockdown started, that everyone was going to die of a viral infection, and their minds went crazy, but they didn't die of the viral infection.
No.
They died of something else.
That's right.
So, but you see, the fear of the viral infection was the false evidence appearing real. Okay. Now, people could go crazy on that and say, whatever you're saying, there's no virus or whatever, but that's a very, very deep conversation that anyone can find the answers to if they're really committed to it. But to loop back now, what I've just showed you, to summarize what I've said so far, is that most people turn to alcohol, television, social media, marijuana, cocaine, anything that creates an alternate reality so that there is a sense of relief from the reality that we are creating collectively and individually, which is all based on what you're afraid of, and what you think you have to be wanted, needed, loved, and valued. Okay, so now that we've established why we all do these things, having worked with a long string of addicts in my life and studied the literature on addiction extensively, I wasn't satisfied with what I saw because it really didn't identify the actual problem. It stated what an addiction is, but it doesn't tell you what the problem is. So I created my own definition of an addiction. An addiction is any repeated behavior that does not produce the results you want. An addiction is any repeated behavior that does not produce the results you want. In order to know what the results are that you want, you must have a clearly stated green goal or objective for your life. You must be passionate about and willing to create something that's bigger than you. If your goal is no bigger than you, then it's easy to make an excuse. You can say, oh, tomorrow. And one of the things that I've found in my career is that the most powerful goals, dreams, or objectives are the ones that somehow help other people have better lives. When I was a young man and I became the trainer of the Army boxing team, I knew then and there that my life path was not to be a professional fighter. It was to help people because I got such a great sense of joy and peace knowing that I was able to help fighters get over injuries quicker, to perform better. I taught them how to eat. I taught them how to train. I taught them many of the same things I teach now. And I found myself much more fulfilled when I could see the brightness in their eyes and see them winning tournaments where they used to not win and lasting longer in the ring where they used to get tired by the middle of the second round. And I felt finally that there was something I could do with my life that was helping other people. And so instead of me winning a fight, I got to win 12 fights in a night. Instead of me trying to get to the Olympics, in the 1988 Olympics, of the 12 boxers on the U.S. Army of the U.S. Olympic team, 11 of them came from my boxing team.
No shit.
And they all had to fight their way onto to the Olympic team. So these guys didn't get a walk on.
Yeah.
But I realized at that moment that what I was teaching was profound and real, because for 11 guys to make it to the Olympic team who were eating and breathing and practicing what I had taught them. And as a side note, it was kind of funny because the coaches used to give me hassle all the time because they were so steeped in the old ways of training fighters. And I kept telling them, you're ruining fighters. As a side note, the way I became the trainer is because I represented the Army in triathlon while I was fighting on the boxing team. And we trained about most days 7 hours, 6 to 7 hours a day. So the coaches were, how in the freaking world? And so were the fighters, like, how in the world can you train for triathlon? You know, I placed in the top 10 overall in 6 USTS distance triathlons and USTS events while I was a competitive fighter. And so I could fight hard through all 3 rounds. And they're like, whatever you're doing. So side note was, my company commander was betting a lot of money on me to win the Army triathlon. He said, Paul, if you want to stop boxing and train full time,
sure,
go ahead, because I want you to win. He says, between me and you, I'm putting a lot of money on you. So you better fucking win.
Yeah.
And I said, that sounds good, because I'd reached the realization that my fighting style was too aggressive. And I was a very Ray Mancini fighter, if you remember who Ray Mancini was. But
boom, boom.
Yeah. And so I thought, well, I can train for triathlon. And so then when I told the boxing coaches I was leaving to go full-time for triathlon, they said, oh my God, don't do that. We'll make you the trainer. All you got to do is train the fighters, teach us what you're doing. We got to get these guys to fight hard for 3 rounds. We need more. A lot of these guys don't have knockout power. You do. You train the team and you can have whatever time you want to do whatever you want. So that's how I became the trainer of the Army boxing team.
Can you distill down like what like a major difference was between the old school training of the boxers and kind of what you were instilling?
Yeah. The old school was work an athlete to death, because if they can't survive the training, they won't survive the fight. And so,
you know what's funny is I had Lance Armstrong on. He's a friend of mine recently, and he talked about how their training program was different than the others because of Ferrari. And it was like they would train right below lactate threshold, where other guys would try to push it up by going through and overtraining.
Yes, that was the big problem. They did a lot of dumb things. Like for example, there's an old habit in boxing that between rounds, you give a boxer a spoon of honey.
Mm-hmm.
They thought, well, that'll pick your energy up. But what they didn't realize is it'll escalate your blood sugar so high, you'll release a ton of insulin and you'll have a blood sugar crash. Yeah. So halfway through the freaking round, you got nothing underneath you. It's like someone pulls the rug out from underneath you. And I said, well, the first thing you got to do is stop doing that. I mean, you got to remember, I'm at the time 20. I became the trainer of the Army boxing team when I was 22, and I fought before that, probably 6 or 7 months before I became the trainer. So fortunately, my mother is a yogi, and my parents were very, very holistic, and I was raised on a farm. So I had the knowledge of eating real food, and I had already tested a lot of the things, like back then, the Eat to Win diet by Robert Haas was real popular. And I found when I started testing all these popular diets that I got bloated and gassy and just didn't feel good. And through a series of steps, I realized by coming back to just letting my body guide me, and I needed about 70% of my diet to be meat and the rest of it vegetables. And that's when I was at my best, which was completely against the grain back then.
Oh, yeah. So the grain.
Yeah, against the grain in every way. And so I was teaching these fighters exactly what I'd learned. And I was not a reader as a kid. I hated reading. I failed reading in the 3rd grade. But the first book that caught my interest, oddly, that I read cover to cover, which happened when I was 21 on the way back from a 10-mile running event where I was representing the Army at the Pentagon. They had a 10-mile race, and it was all the services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and competing. And I was on the team for the Army. And I was in the bus on the way home when I read the last page of Nutrition, A Holistic Approach by Rudolph Ballantyne, MD. It was a 475-page book. And so I was studying. The first book that caught my attention was this book. And I something in my soul said, you've got to read this book. And so it gave me a lot of ways to see nutrition, even though he was much more plant-oriented than I was. And I realized it's great information, but I can't apply that across the board because I know for myself that doesn't work. Point being is I had a fraction of the knowledge I do now. I mean, I've been doing this work for almost 41 years now. I'm 63 now. I began my work as the trainer of the Army boxing team in January 1984. So I was in charge of nutrition. I wrote all the conditioning programs, and unlike most trainers, I did it with them. I led them through it. And they used to hate me because I could work these guys hard and then go train. Mm-hmm. And that was always a mystery to them. I took care of all the equipment. I also implemented the first massage therapy program in the Army, and I did sports massage therapy for all 30 fighters myself, which was hard work.
Jeez.
And that made a massive difference in our performance. I remember the day the team doctor, who was an osteopath, pulled me aside. He said, Paul, whatever the hell you're doing, keep doing it, because I've never seen this team have so little injury and such high performance. And it was actually a problem because when I was getting out of the Army, they offered me to promote me to sergeant. If I would stay, I'm like, you're going to give me an extra $700 a month to stay here? You out of your freaking mind? I promised the team coaches, I said, 3 years from now, I will be making general's wages. And as a side note, exactly 3 years from that day that I told them that, I made 101 grand, and the general at that time was making 90,000 a year.
Oh,
so I called up my head coach, Hank Johnson, and said, remember I told you I'd be making general's wages 3 years? Well, today is 3 years and I'm making more than a general right now.
Yeah.
That's why I didn't stay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But anyhow, I forgot what I was about to tell you, but the point is I took over this whole system and they resisted me all the way because they were so steeped in the old practices. Mm-hmm. And one day, all three coaches, there's three of them, said to me, Paul, you keep telling us what we're doing is wrong, but look how many champions we've created. And of course, the wall's covered with all the champions. Mm-hmm. And I said, you're looking at this wrong. I said, how many great champions have you ruined who could not survive the torture that should be skillfully administered conditioning? And you haven't asked yourself why it is that I can run and win triathlons while doing all this training with you and win fights. That's the question you should be asking. And isn't it strange that the reason you wanted me to be the trainer is because I can do this, but you keep fighting with me all the time and telling me why you don't think it'll work. Now, as a side note, some of the things I implemented that were cutting edge, the boxers had a lot of problems with hand and wrist injuries from hitting so much, from hitting heavy bags for hours, hitting each other for hours. So 2 days a week, I took them to the swimming pool, put them in neck deep water, and we did shadow boxing. We just rounds of shadow boxing in the water, and I'd studied hydrotherapy. So I used the principles of hydrotherapy, and not only did I deepen their conditioning, I decreased the impact on their body and increased the therapeutic response, increased circulation, took load off their heart. And that was revolutionary. The other thing is I mixed track work with boxing. So I'd make them do a 400-meter sprint as fast as they could go to put them into lactate saturation. And at the end of the track would be a guy waiting for him with a set of boxing mitts. And then I would call out combinations, and I trained them to have to fight well saturated with lactate. So they had to keep their minds focused while they were tired. And so we would do repeats, and then I'd give them a minute rest, and we'd do that again. And we built them up to 20 rounds like that.
Holy shit.
So these guys were machines, right? The only teams that ever beat us was Cuba and Russia. And those guys psychologically are, they're desperate to get out of their countries and to have money. So that's a hard barrier to overcome. But we obviously produced great athletes. But really, back to the really issue at hand. An addiction is any repeated behavior that doesn't produce the results you want. So how do I answer your question directly, Cal? Well, here's what I tell myself. I love this smoke, right? That's, it's not really smoke, as you know, it's water vapor, but let's say it was smoke. My question is always, is it helping me accomplish my dream, or is it getting in the way? Is it stopping me from being committed to my athletic development, to my Tai Chi, to my inner work, or is it getting in the way? Is it decreasing my sex drive and my ability to be a man, or is it getting in the way? Is it stopping me from being creative, or is it getting in the way? So I always ask myself with anything, where's the threshold where this actually starts to become antagonistic to my stated dream, goal, or objective? And simply put, if you can't cut it back or put it down, the first thing I do is say we need to reevaluate your dream, goal, or objective. Because if your dream, goal, or objective is not bigger than you, or bigger than your cup of booze, or bigger than your joint, or bigger than your cocaine, you still haven't got clear on what you're here to do. And that's where we have to do some work to go deeper into what I call soul and really identify the genius inside of you. My belief is that we are all God manifest with a piece of the puzzle. Within each of us is something that we're each here to do that only we can do. God never does anything twice. There's no stone. There's not even a grain of sand. There's not even identical twins that are identical. There's nothing in the created universe that's identical. Every single thing God creates is a one-off masterpiece. And it's up to us as a human being to go through the process of self-exploration to find out what it is that's hiding in our heart that, if released into the world, fills that piece of the cosmic puzzle. And the way I share this with my students, I'll say, imagine walking into a great, beautiful auditorium, and there's this massive, gorgeous puzzle on the wall, and it represents the whole universe. If there was one piece missing, where would your eyes immediately go? And everyone agrees, right to the hole. And as no matter how beautiful it is, that hole would be like a black hole. It would suck you in and keep saying, how did an artist that could do this forget that one piece? And every human being alive is one of those puzzle pieces. And so we are always plagued with the question, why am I here and who am I? And when we answer those questions and we live as that person, the piece is fulfilled and the art of life is beautiful.
I feel like even on an individual level, we can get in those states where we have this beautiful tapestry that we've created that is our life, and there's a piece missing, and it becomes more of like a focus on what's not right versus an appreciation for the journey that has taken place that has created this, again, this beautiful tapestry that is missing something. So how do you balance that with, a fixation on always looking for what's not working? Because there are people who have that mindset.
Well,
They're never satisfied.
There's two ways I have to answer that. One, I have to tell you about the 4 causes of addiction. But first, I must tell you, we're all here on a hero's journey, every one of us. God's favorite game to play is hide and go seek. So, the whole universe is God in drag. Every one of us is God in drag. And so, God likes to get lost to make it fun to be found. And that, look around. That's inevitable to see that. If you can't see that, then it's time to wake up. But the hero's journey is such that there's always something of an imbalance and inequity and injustice that sparks the hero to say, I must do something about this. So it might be that somebody realizes that, if I could just control the flow of water, and is inspired to develop the first tap. Or Thomas Crapper in 1847, I believe, thought, wouldn't it be nice to be able to have a shit without having to squat over the hole in the ground and being around all the stink all the time, and invented the toilet. Not that helped us much, but the point is that there's always something that within us we see as a limitation or a challenge that we're inspired to figure out how to resolve it. And so that might be, how do I get over the pain of my childhood? Well, ultimately, what I've found over and over again, and many of the people that I've coached, if you look through your social circles, you'll find we all come through enough pain to make us want to create something else. Even the birthing process can kill you. So we come into the world and we're programmed by this field of resistance, where mostly by unconscious people. And we inevitably have opportunities to say, here's something that I can improve upon. And when your heart is in it, that's your reason to go on the hero's journey. And so the hero's journey starts with some kind of an awakening to the fact that there's something that you can improve upon to help not only yourself, but other people. But then the hero realizes, I don't know enough to do this. So the hero then typically has to start investigating, well, how would I make a tap? Or how would I make a car? How would I, whatever it is, right? How would I teach parents how to parent effectively? how would I teach people how to love better? In every endeavor of human life, there's always somebody coming up with better ways to do things because they're inspired to do that. And so the hero realizes they need more knowledge. So they inevitably have to find a mentor. And the mentor is a genuine mentor is what is called a hierophant in archetypal language, which is someone who's not just a master of bricklaying or stonework or metalwork, but they're usually a master. To be a hierophant, you have to be a master of the physical world, the mental and emotional world, and the spiritual world. So the bigger the challenge for the hero, the more they need supernatural aid. So they need to learn how to tap into higher power. They need to learn that there's more going on here than just the physical world. They need to learn that a tree isn't just a tree. It's a living spirit that has intelligence in it. Many people learn these things when they do their first ayahuasca ceremony,
Most definitely.
Yeah. Or even good marijuana. But the teacher, the hierophant, usually has to initiate you into how to access supernatural powers, because you got to tap into your own soul, which is supernatural. It's spirit is supernatural. It's what's creating the material world. So the spiritual realm is supernatural because we live in nature, but nature is the art that is created by the artist, which we would call source or God or the spirit realm. The teacher is ultimately preparing you for the ordeal. The ordeal is the confrontation. The ordeal is going out into the world and addressing that issue, whether it be righting an injustice, whether it be exposing corruption or some kind of an invention or whatever it is that your soul has called you to do. And once the hero makes it through the ordeal, should they survive, because it's also a spiritual initiation, then inevitably they have to carry the weight of knowledge. Now that they know how to protect people, they have to come down the mountain metaphorically and teach people, hey, look out for the bad guy. Or, hey, you know what? You've got to put a filtration system on your water. That's because you're getting sick drinking water full of parasites or whatever it is. So that's the hero's journey. But your question was really about why we have this tendency to fall into the trap of things like focusing on what's wrong. So I said I'd loop back. So now that you know that we all have to meet this resistance, which is, see, in Spirit Gym, we just like you grow physically in a gym by moving resistance, we won't grow emotionally if we don't encounter resistance. I mean, I don't know anybody that's been married for more than a few years that hasn't figured out, that there's good sex, but then you got to get along with each other for 23 hours for the rest of every day. And that's when Spirit Gym
23
opens.
hours and 55 minutes, depending on who you are.
Well, right. Yeah. I try to keep it to 23 hours. Otherwise I'm not Paul Chek and my system's not working very good. And I've got 2 wives to test my practice. So, then we have mental resistance. We have to grow mentally and we've got to grow spiritually. So when I developed Spirit Gym, I was trying to make it clear to everybody that you have to be conscious of the fact that there are forever growth opportunities physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And creation comes from the top down. So if you're working from the bottom up, it's kind of like someone that's been buried trying to figure out how to get out of a grave while they're buried. It's hard. But if you are educated on how the creative process works, which simply put is always thought, word, deed. Creation follows thought. It crystallizes into a concentrated vibration in word, which you can see the action of in cymatics, how sound frequency or vibration creates form. And then the deed is taking action, right? So you have to, the Quakers say, pray and move your feet. Don't just wait for God to do it for you, So pray, speak it, write it, plan it, and move your feet. Now, back to your question, there's people are always focusing on what's wrong. So Angeli's Arian, who's an amazing woman, she's not here anymore, but she was a shaman and she was an anthropologist. She wrote many great books. She was an expert in tarot and many other things. And in her earlier years, she wanted to figure out why there's so much addiction in the world and what causes it. So she traveled to 110 countries, if I remember right. And she spoke to the native elders in every one of these countries. She spoke to the psychologists. She spoke to addiction counselors. And after 10 years, she tabulated her research and she identified 4 primary causes of addiction. And those are the 4 main things that we have to overcome in spirit, Jim, to have freedom. And one is perfectionism. Anytime you were raised in an environment, for any reason, your parents always wanted you to be perfect. You had to get good grades. You had to look a certain way. You had to, be perfect, almost all of which is a attempt to please God. It's almost always backed by a religious ideal. It's sometimes called puritanical behavior or Puritanism. 2 is intensity. The greater the level of intensity in the environment a child is raised in, the higher likelihood of addiction. Because there you need a wormhole to get out. You need a safe passage out. So I say all addictions are attempts at safe love because they are, right? I was raised in an extremely intense environment. My brother was addicted to drugs by the 7th grade and committed suicide at 34. So I've seen this inside out and backwards, and I was raised in a very intense home. Next is focusing on what's wrong. The more your parents, your teachers, and your caregivers and the people around you focus on what's wrong, the more you focus on what's wrong with yourself, not with what's right or good. And that's enough to drive you to need to medicate yourself. And finally, the need to know. She found that whenever children were raised in an environment like schools where other kids were praised and got favorable treatment because they did good on tests or could answer questions that other kids couldn't, then the other children seeing that realized, I have to know more in order to be wanted, needed, valued, and loved. And so it created an addiction to constantly studying and learning and learning and learning and learning and learning and learning until you have an expert, which is someone who knows more and more about less and less until they know absolutely everything about nothing.
Yeah, wow.
And so piled higher and deeper, progressive head death, PhD. So we've got people that spend their entire half their life in school trying to be good enough to go out and actually practice because they think they don't know enough and they can't get out of that addiction. And I've had many of them as students, and I keep reminding them, you will never get good at something until you practice. The analogy I give them, I say, imagine going to school for 7 years to be a cardiac surgeon. You've read everything, you've studied everything, but you've never operated on somebody. So I take you to the operating theater and we wheel your mother in who's having a heart attack. She's your first patient. Even though you know everything about surgery, are you confident you can operate on your mother? Or are you scared to death because you have no experience? So you don't get good at anything until you practice. And the only way you develop knowledge is through experience. And the only way you develop wisdom is through experience and making mistakes. So when you look at what I've just shared is that most of us are raised in an environment where there's perfectionism, intensity, focusing on what's wrong, and a perpetual need to know. You're right in spirit, Jim, right there. Most of our parents are fairly unconscious, unless we're fortunate enough to have enlightened parents, which is as rare as God manifesting on earth. And us knowing it, even though it's happening all the time. Most of us were conditioned to do what our parents told us we had to do in order to be successful or to not disgrace the family. Most of us are conditioned to believe that we've got to do what makes us enough money or we'll never have what we want in life. So we focus on making money, not what we love to do. Most of us did not have a secure enough attachment to our parents and our family to feel capable of loving ourselves, respecting ourselves, and being at peace with being our unique self. Therefore, we're constantly trying to do what we've got to do to fit in so that we don't feel isolated or extricated, which is inherently the child archetype. And so it's very, very hard to depart from the group because, I'm sure it's not hard for you to remember a time where if you showed up at a party and someone handed you beer and you said, no, thanks, I don't drink beer, they might have said something to you. Or, if you don't eat pizza because it's got gluten in, come on, quit being a fanatic. Or so you see, it's very hard to break out of the social group. But in my system of archetypes, my 4 life process archetypes, it goes child, warrior, king, queen, wise man, wise woman. When we go through puberty, we inherently reject our parental ideas because we can see things that our mom and dad can't see because we don't have all the programming they do. We still have fresh eyes, right? They're carrying all their generational programming. So teenagers, they're quickly ready to change their music, change their hairstyle, drive cars that nobody else wants to drive, do art that people don't like, but 2 years later, it's worth millions of dollars, 5 years later, whatever.
Yeah.
So in other words, we have the warrior archetype inherently built into us because it's an evolutionary drive. Because if we keep recapitulating the same way of seeing and same way of being, as the environment changes, we'll die. So paradoxically, the people that get the most pressure are the ones that can see the most, which are young people. And so to be initiated into the heroes or the warriors archetype, you have to be clear on what it is that you want and what are your own values. You don't have an ego until you can differentiate self from other, right from wrong, should from shouldn't, me from you, and you can stand by it. Ken Wilber cites research in different areas. Some studies say up to 70% of the world population right now still does not have an ego. They're not an adult yet. Recently in his book, Radical Wholeness, he says about 65% of people are still caught at the level of fundamentalist religion, which is the child archetype. They need to be told what to do by a daddy in the sky or a preacher or a pastor or a mommy or a daddy figure.
Those are the same people that watch the CNNs and the Fox News.
That's it, because that's the consensus reality, right?
And the group think, this whole kind of group idea. There's a lot of pressure to be a part of the herd.
Yes,
there's safety, quote unquote, safety in the herd.
Yeah, that's the child archetype.
We saw so much programming come through the media in 2020, and I mean, I think it's always been there. I think for a lot of people, fortunately, there was an awakening to, this is counter to everything that I feel in my body that is right. Mm-hmm. And yet today, 4+ years later, they're still advertising for that thing that harmed so many people.
And people are still falling for it.
And they're wanting younger kids and
even pregnant women.
And so,
that's right there. You see how many people are still in the child archetype. And that's why religion is said to be the opiate for the masses. That's why religion has been commandeered for thousands and thousands of years by emperors and kings. If you get the Tao Te Ching by Richard Wilhelm, in the back of his translation of the Tao Te Ching, he has almost as much of the whole book as is the Tao Te Ching on the history of Taoism and the Chinese culture and how things got that way. But he tells you right in there, the emperors of China for thousands of years had a habit of finding the most evolved spiritual masters, capturing them or bribing them to teach them the most elite levels of their religion, and then using it to control the minds of the masses. So they thought they were practicing religion, but they were doing exactly what the emperors wanted them to do. That's still alive and well today. I mean, during the pandemic, their Pope said, you should, we'll call it, make the safe and effective choice. That's what God wants you to do. Pastors and preachers all over the world were telling people that's what God wanted them to do. And well, that is the hijacking of religion, and it's alive and well. Rudolf Steiner warned, I don't know, I did you happen to listen to my podcast, Lucifer, Christ, Ahriman?
No.
Oh, that'll blow your mind.
Okay.
That's my 5-hour special that I got at the beginning of all this to let people know what was really going on. And I quoted Steiner in many places of his teachings, who was a Christian and a Rosicrucian, to show how Ahriman, which simply put is the dark force, it would be what most Westerners would call evil or the devil or Satan. There's a loose correlation there. And he also talks about Lucifer, which is it's too complex to get into in 5-10 minutes here, but my podcast episode 250, that's Living 4D with Paul Chek, which is now Spirit Gym with Paul Chek. But I put a month, I stopped writing my book and building my program because it was so important for me to help people understand what was really going on in the world. I put 1 month to writing a 93-page script.
Wow.
I put 28 resources in it anyone could look into. And I got Penny, who's an amazing orator, and Angie, who's very good. And they each played a part, and we did it like an audio book. And I basically invested about $250,000 of my time to putting this together. And it was, even though it was, I think, 5 hours long, it became the most listened to podcast in 2023.
Wow.
And I've had countless people. I had a guy who was 84, 85 years old on my podcast, who was a Steiner initiate, who started the first Waldorf school in Boulder, in all of Colorado, in Boulder, Colorado, who's very tapped in guy. I did a podcast with him and his wife, and he was saying in the beginning, I love that Lucifer, Christ, Ahriman podcast. And his wife goes, yeah, he's listened to it 10 times, Paul.
Damn.
And I said, really? I said, Makasha, why'd you listen to it 10 times? He goes, Paul, it is so deep and so good. I had to listen to it 10 times to really get the depth of what you were saying. And he said, it's so important. Everyone needs to listen to this 10 times, And so, I poured my heart and soul into that. But look, there's the hero's journey right there.
Yeah.
Right? Every Luke Skywalker needs a Darth Vader. We've all got one.
Yeah.
We if we don't have one, we make one. If we don't have one, we make one. And that's what people have to realize. In Spirit Gym, you cannot grow consciously without resistance. And so if we, look, I've been coaching very wealthy people for a long, long time. There was a time I had 6 billionaires flying their own private jets to see me at the same time. I've worked with the best athletes in the world, sports teams. I mean, I can't even remember all the elite athletes I've worked with, movie stars, musicians, music producers. People think money makes you happy. It does not make you happy.
I think what we've seen publicly, that music and Hollywood, it doesn't seem to be a happy bunch over there.
No, it doesn't make you happy.
Complete facade from what we've been
Money is
told.
Energy, and it amplifies. So the more money you have, the more energy you have. And if you put energy into an imbalanced circuit, it will blow the circuit up. Think of, why do we have breakers in houses? Because if too much energy goes through and there's no breaker, it'll burn the house down.
Yeah.
So the breaker blows to let you know there's a short in a circuit and you got to fix it.
Fuck yeah.
Okay. So what
I
happens?
had one of those this summer.
Yeah. And so if you put too much energy through somebody who's not spiritually intact, then it will bring the devil out and magnify it. It will bring drug addictions. It will bring manipulation. It'll bring greed. It'll amplify everything.
Because you're so overwhelmed that that's your breaker is the substances or whatever. For some people, it could be social media. It's like just to balance, feel like you're balancing it out, but you're really just checking out.
Well, the breaker is the consequence. The imbalance is what happens when you look. I'll give you a perfect example that's easy for you to.
By the way, you're talking about coming down from the mountaintop. This is what Spirit Gym is. This is you and the podcast, Lucifer, Christ,
Ahriman.
Like that is, going to the mountaintop, coming down and sharing. You've done this your entire life.
I've been doing.
You did this when you were working with the boxers. I mean, this is the work you're here to do.
And I was raised in hell. I mean, don't get me wrong. Yes, my mother loved me, but my mom had a really tough life, and she just happened to end up in a marriage with a man of probably desperation with 3 kids, who was a very violent human being and very painful to be around. And for whatever reasons, I talked to her about it, and she said, look, imagine being a woman with 3 children all alone, having to work 2 8-hour a day jobs to pay babysitters to keep you alive and cared for, and having nobody to support you. And then being in a situation where you're with a man who's exactly how your stepfather was, but not knowing, how do I leave this relationship? How do I leave a farm? And how do I go now with 4 kids, because she had one with him? And how do you do that? How do you go as a waitress out into the world and make enough money? She said, Paul, I did the very best that I could, and I didn't know what else to do. And so, having talked to my soul and God about this, is, why in the hell did I have to go through this? And my soul said, Paul, you got to realize that the more a soul evolves, think of a soul like an athlete. I can deadlift. At that time, I was deadlifting 500 pounds for 10 sets in a workout. My soul said, if I only put 250 pounds on the bar, you're not going to grow. So if as a soul in your last lifetime, you evolve to lifting 500 pounds, then you have to go into a new lifetime that's going to push you beyond that. So you came into this lifetime and you chose an environment that would create exactly the type of pain and the amount of pain that you needed to resolve. And the benefits of that you would go out and show everybody else how you did it. So we all take on the weight on the bar in Spirit Gym. And a lot of the more evolved souls choose tough beginnings so that they have enough of a life left to be a teacher or a therapist or a doctor or a healer or a guide. So my soul said, most of the more evolved souls that have lived more lifetimes come in and choose challenging beginnings so that they can do the developmental work they've got to do that will unlock the gifts that they came to give. So I realized that helped me heal a lot of my pain, was realizing that I chose that path specifically so I would learn how to heal that trauma and be able to help others do the same,
Yeah, the classic happening for you, not to you.
Yes.
And back to your original point is that it was a choice you made.
Yeah, it's hard for us most people that aren't deep enough into their spiritual development to say, wait a minute, I chose this, you're out of your fucking mind,
Well, land that for people that are like, what the fuck are you talking about? Why would you choose that?
Well, look, Cal, you're obviously a very successful man. Has it been all easy for you?
No.
Have you had really hard times?
Right? Yes.
Like I was coaching Jason Picard, who has been on your podcast, when he lost, I don't remember how much money, 153 million or some crazy thing in a trade, and almost wiped his whole organization out, and he had to sit down with Paul Tudor Jones and have a long talk. And you got about 24 hours to figure this out, period. And, that was a shocker for him. And he did what I taught him to do. He went into meditation, and long story, it's on my podcast with one of my podcasts with Jason. But my point is, there's an example of someone who has the world by the balls, and all of a sudden the rug's gone and he's falling into an abyss of millions and millions of dollars on what he thought would be a good trade, but turned out to be a disaster. And he had to recover. And, I've been bankrupt. I've studied piles of multimillionaires and great thinkers, and it's very, very common. There's more multimillionaires that have gone bankrupt probably than there is that hasn't. It's part of the learning process. So, when you look at like I trained a lot of the best fighters in the world. Most of them have been knocked out. Most of them had their teeth put through their lips. Most of them have had their face blackened. Shit. I mean, I rode in the rodeo and got trampled. I've had many serious bad injuries racing motocross. Was in a coma for 2 days from a motorcycle racing accident. But I still got back on. I climbed back on that damn thing and I can't wait to do it again, but I'm going to be a little smarter this time. We've most of us have fallen in love and been drunk to God with sex and thought we had the world by the tail. And next thing you know, we're fighting like hell. And we look at that same person and they aren't nearly as beautiful now. Yeah. This is why there's an old saying, not 10 feet from every beautiful woman is a man that's tired of having sex with her, and I'm sure it goes both ways. So I don't want to be one-sided about that. But, life is a marriage of two complementary opposite forces, and there is no growth without resistance. There's no real legitimate knowledge without loss and challenge. There's no wisdom without going through the mill of legitimate development. So when you get deep enough into yourself and you make contact with what soul is, and there's no such thing as a soul without spirit. Soul is the aspect of you that's having the experience. Soul is the memory of all your experience. Soul is the feeling of being you. Soul is the sense of I am. Spirit is the flow of energy and information. Spirit is what's playing the drum. Soul is the drum vibrating, right? When I'm doing a healing for somebody and I tap into their soul and ask for the rhythm that will heal them, what's moving the stick is spirit. The vibration that is coming off the drum is the experience being created by spirit. So, what are you? A bunch of membranes. What is a drum? A membrane. So the membrane on the drum represents the gateway between the spiritual dimension and the physical dimension. So when you hit the drum's skin, it vibrates and there's an experience. There's a sound. There's something happening. But you can't see the spirit. Spirit moves through you because your brain and your nervous system and your energy fields are sensitive to the vibrations that science can't yet measure, such as thought, or even higher than that is spirit. So the point I'm making is spirit is the flow of God consciousness as thought, as energy, as information. Soul is what is having the experience. The world has a soul. It's called the world soul, or the anima mundi. But the point I'm making is there's no such thing as spirit without soul or soul without spirit, because if there was spirit and no soul, it would be like water flowing out of a pipe into an abyss of emptiness. What would it do?
That's no container.
There's nothing to do with it. Spirit without something to move or to animate that has an experience is it's a mute concept. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't do anything. Soul without spirit has nothing to make it dance, nothing to make it breathe, nothing to make it live. So we're all this beautiful balance of spirit and soul constantly interacting with, and it is through the experience of being alive, through the experience of experiencing the opportunity to create, to learn, to live, to love, to grow, to solve challenges, that we're ultimately God looking for itself and expressing all its creative potentials. The difference is God can't die. You can't kill spirit. I mean, look at the laws of thermodynamics. Energy produced cannot be destroyed, only transformed. So there's really the physical body dies, but really it's a collection of elements, right? It's animated by spirit. It's a biological level of intelligence that's, beyond our own comprehension. As much as we know about the cell, there's a lot more we don't know. Yeah. I mean, like what we know about biological life, even though we get hubris and scientific hubris, just like any good scientist would tell you, there's so much more we don't know than we do know. That it's a miracle that we're even here. So when you look at the depth of the mystery of even our own body and the fact when you actually say, okay, wait a minute, you got a body, you breathe 25,900 breaths a day on average. Where did it come from? Outside of you. You're breathing molecules that Buddha breathed, that Lao Tzu breathed. And that's a scientific fact. Every one of us is every day. If you do the math, I got books that show the math on that. Your body's 99.9% water by molecular count. Where'd it come from? Outside of you. Your body can't function without light. Where'd it come from? The sun. Your body can't live without food. Where'd it come from? All around you, all over the world, out of the earth. Well, then you say, okay, where'd the light come from? Where'd the water come from? Where'd the earth come from? Well, it came from the solar system. Where'd that come from? The galaxy. Where'd that come from? The universe. Well, guess what? Not one of us can be here without the entire universe being involved. And that's scientific fact. Scientific, your body is approximately, depending on which book you read, 100 trillion cells, each made of 100 trillion atoms. Okay, so how do you get 100 trillion cells made of 100 trillion atoms to not only dance, but hold their form so when Cal gets out of bed every morning and looks himself in the mirror, he recognizes his I am. And that is the creation of your soul and your spirit. That's the organizing intelligence that brings it all together. Remember, matter cannot organize itself. I tell my students, how long do you have to stand next to a pile of rocks before a toaster oven or a Rolex jumps out? Well, the answer is forever.
Yeah.
If you study alchemy, water and earth are non-volatile elements. Fire and air, which is fire represents the desire of God in alchemy. Fire has desire, the desire of God to experience itself, to know itself. Air represents the mind. Fire and air are volatile elements. They make water and earth move. They changed water and earth. They make things out of water and earth. So when you consider that the desire of God to experience itself and the flow of energy and information between 2 points of sentience is what a mind is, which is all based on love. Love is the primordial code that means relationships. Love is a word that means relationship, to hold together is what love is. So what you actually have is you have mind created by love, because love is relationship. See, I'm talking to you right now, and energy is flowing, energy and information is flowing from me to you and you to me. You can't have that without a relationship. So love means relationship. So when God looks into itself, it looks into itself, and out of love, it relates to itself. And that causes the flow of energy and information, or spirit. The act of God looking into itself is the first movement, or is no first movement in God, but in English, we have to speak that way. So when God looks into itself and says, I dream Cal into existence because Cal is going to be able to play this way of expressing my I am. So God's saying, I'm going to go be Cal. I'm going to be Paul. I'm going to be, and this is the game, right? Well, that act of looking in is what causes the movement of spirit from pure potential or unconditional love into conditions, without which God cannot love itself unconditionally. It is, from a Hindu perspective, it is the movement of God's awareness into itself that causes the flow of energy, which is what produces the sound called Om. Om is the code word by the yogis for the primordial sound that creates existence. So if you realize that in metaphysics, sound means all frequencies. It does not just mean audible sound. If you study Sufism, for example, you will see in Sufism, it's clearly defined that sound in Sufi terms and sound also in metaphysical terms means the whole spectrum of vibration, from the fastest, which would be spirit, from the slowest, we call that stone. And so when God looks into itself, the flow of energy and information into its own dream, which manifests its dream just like a crystallization of a hologram, is what produces the vibration of Om. And Om manifests God's dream, and we are all living God's dream. And God's dream is ultimately to know itself, which is exactly what our quest is.
Right.
And so when we find the truth of ourselves, we paradoxically give God the experience of finding that too, because there's a little, paradox involved here. There is no God. It doesn't matter what my relationship with God is, or what Lindsay's is, or what anybody else's is. The only God you can know for sure is the one inside of you. So God can't know more about itself than Cal does. And Cal can't know more about God than his experience and his quest gives him. So the day that Cal becomes truly self-realized and goes, oh my God, I get it, and really gets it, that's the day that God wakes up to itself. Now, I might be over here just as dumb as a sack of hammer handles, right? And lost and, stoned out of my mind on coke. But this is, Osho says you'll never understand God until you can handle a paradox, and everything about God's paradoxical. So one of the premises of Spirit Gym is you must individuate. You must become a self-sufficient adult, and you must take responsibility for your own quest of I am. You must put the time and the energy to identify who you are and why you're here, or you will always be a sheep in a herd and will always produce pain, because God built a failsafe into his plan, or into her plan, or into its plan. And that's what I call the pain teacher. The pain teacher will always come to awaken a sleeping God so that it goes deeper, so that it looks more carefully. And that's one of the reasons there's so much pain in the world, because God gets lost in its own garden and sends the pain teacher to say, hey, you're looking in the wrong bottle. You're looking in the wrong drugstore. You need to go out and get in the gym, right? Or, you need to make love every day, not putting hubcaps on cars or building computer circuits and doing the same shit all the time. It's because that's mundane. It doesn't take you anywhere. And since God can't die, all of this is just a beautiful, amazing game of hide and go seek. But, we feel pain. So we know that this thing called death feels very, very real to us. And it is real. Of course it's real, because it's like a chapter in a book. A life is like a chapter in the grand book of life. But what coming to me that I want to share with you just to, before I pause my thought, is, the word myth really means story. But you see, in my system of Spirit Gym, first you have zero, which is unconditional love, that for which there is no other, the only being that can create itself and sustain itself. Zero is a mystery. One is being itself. So being is everything that's in a state of being or existence, which is what Spirit Gym is. Two is duality. So you go, in my system, you go zero, then you go Om, because God's looking into itself, and then you go myth, then you go principle 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 10 principles of Spirit Gym. Each looks at different aspects of how consciousness unfolds itself in ways we can develop and things we need to be aware of, because those 10 principles you can't escape, and not being aware of them brings the pain teacher every time.
Yeah.
So the point I'm making is God looks into itself, which is called God dreaming. The act of looking in creates sound, which is the formative force that manifests God's dream. The story of how God is dreaming itself into existence and realizing itself is what myth is. So here's something very, very profound. I learned this from James Carse, who was a professor of theology and philosophy at the New York University for 38 years, who wrote some incredible books, one of which is called Finite and Infinite Games, which is powerful, powerful book. And he was like 87 or 89 when I interviewed him. And I immediately set up a second interview with him because it was so friggin' amazing. It blew my mind. I'm like, this guy, I would be on my knees to be his student. And just before our second podcast was supposed to happen, I got a call from his wife who said, I'm sorry, James passed away. Turned out he had brain cancer while I was podcasting with him. And the guy at 88 or 89 years old, sharp as, man. I mean, you're talking to someone you would never know was an old man and just on his game. But when he told me what a myth was, I damn near went into samadhi because it was so powerful. He said, a myth is a story that tells itself. So you think if life is a story that's telling itself, then you have to say who's telling the story.
Mm.
The only answer is God.
Mm.
A materialist has no answer for that. Rocks?
Hmm.
Well, then you have to say what's talking through the rocks, because I haven't ever met a rock that can talk without something like spirit moving through it. And I know a lot about rocks.
Hmm.
So a myth is a story that tells itself. Our myth is our life story. And when you realize who and what you are, you realize who is telling the story. And you realize who is smoking too many bags or drinking too much booze or caught in a sex addiction. And you then get to change your story because you can choose to do that.
Choice.
That's why free will is inherent, because God does not want to be loved artificially. Sex with a blow-up doll is not pleasing compared to sex with a living human being, right?
Mm.
We want to know that we're genuinely being loved. God wants to be, and I'm speaking in metaphor here, but God wants to know that its own creation loves it, not because it has to, because it wants to. And so evil has to be present to give us the choice to not love God. So evil is our guarantee that we have free will. And evil is any act that goes against life itself. So a moral is a code of conduct that's life affirmative, and evil is immoral. It's anti-life. And because evil itself cannot exist without life, evil ultimately comes to its own impasse, because if it reaches its zenith, it kills life and ceases to exist.
Yeah.
So it has nowhere to go but God then.
Yeah, so it's stuck. As
So
you said earlier,
evil gets stuck.
it's in its own purgatory.
It has to go face the mirror of itself. But God accepts that too, because without that, there is no free will. And without that, there is no capacity to love by choice. And without that, we won't grow. So paradoxically, evil is the pain teacher in many instances, saying, this is what you're creating. And because you are God, you must live with your creations. And so there's, the reason I created Spirit Gym is because I watched people getting further and further into belief systems that were not teaching them things that were true. And they were getting more and more programmed and more robotic and more sick and falling into more and more isms. And Jung and Joseph Campbell and Marci Eliade and many of the greatest mythologists and thinkers of our era said that whenever a culture's myth breaks down, two things are likely to happen. Wars are likely to break out, and isms will pop up everywhere. And Nazism is what happened when the Christian myth began to break down. And so I saw all these isms popping up. Scientific materialism is very dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
I've watched people fall into veganism and vegetarianism, and I've had to rehab countless of them. You've got communism, socialism. I mean, if you just go research isms, they're all over the place.
Yeah.
And what is an ism? It is a belief system in which there's always a leader that plays the role of a mommy or a daddy figure that tells you what to believe and what to do, which is the container for the child archetype. So anyone that falls into an ism or a belief system is actually giving their power away to a leader who uses their energy and their resources to accomplish their own objective, often at the expense of others and at the expense of life.
You see, these all the religions are all isms, right?
They're isms, every one of them. And there's great things in them,
Mm-hmm.
but part of growing up is being able to sift through.
Yeah, discernment.
And there's great things that all of our parents taught us, because even if they were abusive to us and they were alcoholics or drug addicts, they taught us that's not the way to live.
Yeah, if we're willing to see that side of it, it's like, it's the whole Buddhism, it's both.
Yeah, it's all there. So, when we go through puberty, we inherently want to reject the parts of mom and dad that were painful or didn't work or that we didn't like. But we are also stupid if we don't carry the parts of mom and dad that worked. Like if your dad was a real asshole, but was a master at managing and using money, you don't want to reject the money management because your dad was an asshole.
Yeah.
You say, well, when I become a father, these are the things I got to make sure I don't do. But this part of my dad, I got to make sure I do to give my family safety and security.
Yeah.
So that's the warrior archetype. When the warrior archetype comes on, we got to get clear on what mom and dad did well and what they didn't do well and what we're going to learn. This is why Jung says all children are tasked with the unfinished business of their parents' lives. And it's dead true. That's the guaranteed built-in you're going to grow plan. And if you don't grow, the pain teacher is going to come visit you. And the worst thing you can do is drug the pain teacher, because then you just cop out of life. And then when you finally do pass away, Steiner says the first thing that happens when you die is you find yourself surrounded by people just like you. And you stay with them until you're absolutely sure of what you'll never do again. So my goal has always been to make sure I love being with myself. So when I die, I'm going, yay, let's party. Let's paint. Let's lift some weights. Let's dance. Fucking hell, I did it. I like being with me.
So, dudes, again, central to all this, and you've said it a few times, is having that stated dream.
And
that's the anchor point.
If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there.
Yeah.
And this is one of my favorite quotes. Rest assured, if you are not working for your own goals, you are working for your bosses.
Yes.
So you might as well step up to the plate now and figure out who you want to be and put some time and energy into why you're here and who is the I am. And that's why in Spirit Gym, one of the first things I do once I get you through some of the initial basic training is show you exactly what a myth is very deeply, so you understand it without any question. And then I show you how to go about writing and illustrating your personal myth. And then you have, and I tell you, it should be readable by a 12-year-old, because your myth should be a gift to your children and everybody around you. And I show you how to illustrate it, because the illustration captures the whole story in an image. And I tell you, don't worry about how good it looks. Be a kid, get some crayons. I don't care. But use it as a spiritual practice to meditate and let soul draw through you. Let soul doodle through you. And man, I remember when Jason first did his myth, it had a very powerful effect on him. In fact, can I tell you how Spirit Gym how I got the funding for it?
I would love that. Yeah.
Okay. Because this is a myth story.
Yes.
It just turns out two of my best friends in my whole life are my longest running clients. Jason Picard. He's one of my best friends I've ever had and will ever have. And I love you. So if you're listening, Jason, I love you, baby. Baby, you're just amazing. And Amy Fournier was my longest running female client and still is. And she's been studying my teachings for 30 plus years. I can't, Amy is like stunningly beautiful, like a Charlie's Angel. But imagine that in a professional dancer's body, and you got Amy Fournier. And here I am, all these years looking at her in my audience. I'm like, okay, you're the girl that whenever you show up, I can't fucking think straight, And she likes to hug me and kiss me, which makes it even harder. And so she went into a pretty intense, she had a very tough life, long story, but she went into a very intense midlife crisis. And one day I got a phone call and Penny walks up. She goes, there's a lady named Amy Fournier on the phone. She thinks you might remember her. And she wants to know if you would be willing to take her on as a personal client, because she's really having a hard time right now. And I smiled at Penny and I said, tell Amy I've been waiting for her for a long time, because I knew it was coming.
Yeah. Long
story, but I'd seen who she got married to and all the shit was going on, and I have abilities that grow with spiritual practice. So I'm like, it's time. So I said, of course, tell her I've been waiting for her. And so that shocked her. I was like, oh my God, because she didn't think she'd get an appointment with me. And so she came to me in a really intense midlife crisis, and she had a really tough childhood. Long story, I won't divulge too much for her own privacy, but not something most people could survive.
Mm-hmm.
And so I applied my teachings that I use and with all my patients to help them get to the bottom of, what's causing the midlife crisis. Where's all the things I have to do with people. It normally takes 3 years to take people through the process of healing at a midlife crisis or any major transition, just because there's so much inner work. You can't push people because it's too intense. Like, a lot of people have very, very traumatic childhoods, like I did and she did. And so if you take someone too fast, the intensity of experiencing that much emotion and pain, it can actually crack somebody up. It's just like they can feel so much pain that they don't even want to heal. So I have to be very careful. But anyhow, I took Amy step by step through my healing process. And we were now 2 years in therapy, just at the 2-year mark. And I'll never forget, we were in my library and I was helping her. She had written her myth and I said, okay, now we got to break it, simplify it, encapsulate it. And her and I were painting her myth as well. And we had just finished the paintings. And I actually painted her myth for her as well. I often paint with my patients and I give them the art that I do as a gift. Jason's got piles of paintings I've given him. And she had just finished the painting. And I said, okay, look, I've encapsulated your myth. And I used it. I use Ken Wilber's 4-quadrant model, which is your personal interior, which is the domain of your inner consciousness and soul. Collective interior, which is the inner domain of all the people you share life with, family, friends, coworkers, what I call the cast and crew of your story. Upper right quadrant is your personal exterior, which is your body, anything weighable, measurable, anything that's an action, such as anything I can film. So that's your physical. That's what I call the actor. So your myth is the upper left corner. You're the actor in the upper right. The cast and crew is the bottom left, and the world stage is the bottom right. So I take a myth and I break it down so you can see what's your story that you're acting out, who's the cast and crew, who's the good guys and the bad guys, and what's the nature of the world that you've created in your myth, which no matter how wild and crazy it is, it's a symbolic expression of the world you're in right now. So we put her art up. And I let her listen as I read her myth to her. And tears began to pour out of her eyes. And she looked at me and she said, Paul, I want you to know officially I'm no longer in a midlife crisis. I'm healed. I'm fine. Thank you. And then she said, I'm just curious. Is this the kind of stuff that you're putting in Spirit Gym? Said, Amy, you've just spent 2 years in Spirit Gym. This is exactly what's in Spirit Gym. I just took you through it for 2 years. She said, this needs to be out immediately. The world needs this right now. She said, why have you not published this yet? I said, I can give you 400,000 reasons why. She goes, money? I said, yes, I have to do this good. I need a world-class artist. This has to be done right. It's got to be done so that even if people are lazy and don't like to read, they can just look at the art and the diagrams and it'll act on them. They're unconscious to open them so they grow. She said, write up an agreement. I'll give you the money. And so that's how Spirit Gym got started.
Holy shit.
The angel came.
That's incredible generosity. And that's her support of you coming down from the mountaintop. That was her mountaintop coming down to share.
Yeah.
I'm sure she's doing it in other ways, but that's the facilitation of like really important work that, again, as we've seen, I think has come very much into many people's consciousness over the last 4+ years.
Yeah.
Of things there's a lot of cognitive dissonance. People don't get it. Things aren't adding up, but they can't put their finger on things. And it's too intense for a lot of people to start to go down rabbit holes. They maybe don't have the right resources. They're not surrounded by the right people. They're back into groupthink. It's safer.
Children also don't want to know the truth.
Oh, that's true. Whenever my kids are much older now, but like when you try to give them the truth, they're like, fuck, no. Like, I can't fucking hear you.
Well, think of this. Like, let's remember when we were kids and we really believed in Santa Claus. It was so fucking magical. I mean, I was raised in a very violent household. but one time of the year where it was safe. And I knew I could sit at the table without getting smacked in the head for letting my mouth open while I ate. Or my father was German, so I had these very strict table manners. And if you dare chewed with your mouth open or drank too much milk out of a glass, he would reach across the table, slap you in the head so hard you'd fly right out of your fucking chair. You'd get blood coming out of your mouth. I mean, I had to eat with tremendous attention to every detail, and it was stressful as hell. So when Christmas came, we knew everybody was going to get something. We knew it would be fun. We knew we'd get to eat nice foods. And, it was just a time of the year that, like, as a kid, Santa Claus was something that I really look forward to. If you would have told me when I was 8 that my dad was Santa Claus, I would have told you were absolutely out of your goddamn mind, because it's not even possible for that guy to be Santa Claus. It's fucking not possible. Yeah. I don't care. If you were an adult, I would have told you are lost and confused and you need help. Right? So you see the point I'm making with one example. We often don't want to know the truth.
It's a house of cards.
Look, one of the truths that people don't want to know is that God is the myth maker playing both sides, but choosing neither and leaves choice to you.
Yeah.
How many people want God to be the rescuer that always will do anything for them, that will give them money when they're broke and compensate for their mistakes in relationships and pay the bills they don't want to pay and do the good work that they're not willing to do at work? I mean, when you look at most people's beliefs and relationship with the idea of God, it's worse than child. It's infantile. And that's why about 65 to 70% of the world's religious population is still in the child archetype, because they don't want to actually grow up. Jung said most people want to stay unconscious because they don't want the responsibility of being conscious. Steiner said spiritual development is crazy making and it's hard work, and that's why most people reject it, because they would rather just...
It's a fucking heavy lift.
It's a heavy lift.
You get that red pill and it's like, okay, what do I do with this?
Yeah, but the question is, what do you do if you don't take it? You get what we saw in the last 4.5 years, and you get what some estimates say now 32 million dead.
Yeah.
That's what you get.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you get when you can't, here's a good example. Why do parents always have to be concerned about letting their kids go out on Halloween? Because people put razor blades and poison in apples and they do bad things, right? So if kids are out in the world without parents around to check the candy, kids get hurt and die.
Yeah.
Well, right now, for the last 4.5 years, you can get free beer, pizza, and candy if you make the safe and effective choice.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of dead kids.
Yeah.
Okay, so the reality of it is, there comes a time in your life where you have to realize you are in a spirit gym. And the reason you're in the gym is because you are Ram Das. Ram means God and Das means worker. You are doing the work. Every one of us, every living being, from the microorganisms to the birds, the bees, and the flowers and the trees, is one unique expression of the divine that is allowing the divine to experience itself as that, in that way of relating and being. And if you don't wake up to the fact that you are Ram Das, that you are that you are a one-time only expression of the divine, that you have the complete freedom to make anything you want out of yourself. And the answer from unconditional love is always yes. Unconditional love never says no. That's one of the big things that's hard to swallow about God. You want to be evil? Go ahead.
Yeah.
But you're going to have to wear the consequences of it. And I'll be there with you.
Mm-hmm.
The answer is yes. You want to be loving? I'll do that with you too. You want to jump off the roof and commit suicide? Old trick, done it a lot of times. But the answer is yes. That's, people think a God that says yes all the time is like the candy man that never says no. But God says yes to both sides of the equation. And it's the only way God can wake up to its own self, because even though God is omniscient, all-knowing, you cannot have wisdom without experience. Therefore, God has to test its own omniscience against life. God has to test its own perfection against life. How can you know if something's perfect unless you test it? You can't. So life is where God tests its own perfection. Life is where God tests its own capacity for love. That's what Spirit Gym is.
I think that's
To not know that is more painful than realizing it.
well, it's a perfect place too, where I think a lot of folks stop short of having experience. They'll even listen to this podcast, be like, oh, that sounds cool.
Yeah.
But then won't try to integrate certain things they learn to see if it's actually true for them.
Well, the pain teacher always comes to get you. So it's just a matter, I tell people all the time, because I'm a kind of guy, whenever I lecture, wherever I lecture, a lot of people hate me and a lot of people love me.
Mm-hmm.
And people will always come to me and say, Paul, I love your lectures, but my girlfriend, you really piss her off. Or my friend, he thinks you're a complete asshole. And I say, you know what? It doesn't matter if you love me or you hate me. I got you either way.
Yeah.
Because if you love me, you'll look into my teachings and you'll practice them and your life will change. And if it doesn't work, you're going to come tell me about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll accept responsibility if you're doing it right and it's not working and it's never happened yet, because I test everything before I teach it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you hate me, you're going to walk around telling everybody about what I said. And you're going to say that Paul Chek, he's an idiot. He thinks you can get gluten intolerance and that fogs your brain up and it won't be but 3, 4, 5 days. Someone will say, well, he's telling you the truth, right? And then you're going to have to look at everything you eat that's got gluten in it. And you're going to have to realize it's your fault and that no doctor's going to help you and that no pill's going to help you until you change your diet. So I say, look, you can love me or you hate me. I got you. Because once you've been heard, you've been awakened. The alarm's gone off, the lid's off the cookie jar, the dragon's coming out. And so, if you don't want to admit that you're in Spirit Gym, then it doesn't matter to me. Walk around. I've already planted the seed of awakening in your head.
Yeah.
Just look at your life, talk to people, look at what's going on in religion, look at all the sex in the church, all the violence in the church. There's an old saying, the devil's favorite place to hide is in the church, and it's truer than true can get. Look at what's gone on in the last 4.5 years. Look at the fact that we're spending tons of money to bomb the shit out of people that we don't have any need to be getting involved with, and we should be using that money to support people and educate people. There's a million ways we could make the world a better place right now, and just the money in the top 33 billionaires created during COVID alone would rebuild the education systems, heal the soil, heal the waterways. I mean, Bill Gates alone could change the world for the better if he wanted to.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that think he is, and that's what's so fucking alarming.
Well, that's because they're still children and they're looking at a daddy figure.
Yeah.
And they're pretending he's Santa Claus, but the reality of it is
we know what he's got in that sack of his.
Yeah, exactly.
Fucking
well, yeah, I mean, there's a reason he's wanted for crimes against humanity by the country of India.
Oh yeah.
I mean, he's actually been found guilty of crimes against humanity by India, and if he steps foot in India, they'll arrest him, and I would be lovely to see that happen. But you see, the point I'm only making is, how many times have we found out that some savior turned out to be something else, right? Over and over and over again. My point is, it doesn't matter what you believe, because there's this thing called reality. And I've got probably 10 books in my library debating what reality is. And having studied all of these books, I do what I always do. I say, okay, I'll have to make my own definition of reality, because clearly people are confused. So I will tell you what reality is. And if someone thinks they can come up with better definitions than me, then please do. Yeah. Reality is two things. Reality is what's happening right now. That's been going on forever. Whatever's happening right now, that's reality. Reality is Bill Gates is Bill Gates, and Bill Gates announces who he's going to kill years in advance. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He's so confident in himself. He tells everybody. I'll never forget.
Right in plain sight.
I'll never forget. I watched a TED talk where he says, we're going to reduce the population with vaccinations. And he talked all about it. And not one single idiot in the crowd raised their hand and said, wait a minute. Vaccines are supposed to save people from death, not causing. Not one person in the whole audience even questioned it. I'm like, that's proof of the child archetype right there.
Yes.
Okay. Reality is what your life depends upon. Your life depends upon food, water, safety, shelter, warmth, breath, love. And there's no way around it. That's reality. So whatever your beliefs are about God or anybody else, if it doesn't help you have food, breath, safety, water, shelter, warmth, and love, then you're not living in reality and it will come bite you. And if you're not paying attention to what's happening right now, then you're playing too many video games and doing too many drugs and it will bite you. Like, if you're not paying attention to what's happening when you're driving a car, you're going to get yourself and someone else killed. So regardless of what game you want to play in life, you cannot escape the fact that reality is what's happening right now, and reality is what supports your ability to live. And if you lose what supports your ability to live, you'll die. And you're out of the game, at least out of this one.
Yeah.
If you're not paying attention to what's happening right now, then you're also out of the game. And the game has walls and rules so that you hit things when you're not paying attention to what's happening right now.
Well, and as people are trying to make sense of what's happening right now in their reality, there's a lot of different sources.
There is. And that's why Steiner says, I'll have to try to do this simply, but the soul grows in stages. So first you have a mineral soul, which is what your bones are. I mean, it's the mass that, the whole biological kingdom needs the mineral kingdom to exist. No rocks, no home. It's the physiosphere, right? That's the sphere of physics. Out of the mineral soul grows the biological soul, which is your body. Then you have the intellectual soul. That's how you develop an ego, a sense of self. Then comes the awareness soul. Steiner says the awareness soul begins to grow the moment you start asking the question, is it really true?
Curiosity.
Is it really true Bill Gates is a good guy? Is it really true that this or that virus is real? Or is it something made up on a computer and promoted on television to be real? Is it really true that money will make me happy? Is it really true that sex will make my life better? Is it, we could, once you start asking, is it really true? And you do the work to find out, you are maturing as a soul. So no matter what I've just said on this podcast or what you say or what we ever say, there's a lot of people that will disagree, but they won't disagree based on real knowledge. This is why David Bohm says real thinking is hard work. That's why most people rearrange their prejudices and call it thinking, because that's copping out on the work of thinking. But for you to grow as a soul, you have to ask, whenever it's important, is it really true? And do the work to find out. And then you own the knowledge.
Back to the whole have your own experience.
Have your own experience. Go on the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell says, speaking of the hero's journey, if you get to the edge of the forest and you see a trail in front of you, do not take it. It's not your own. You must cut your own trail through the woods or you cannot complete the hero's journey. You can't live somebody else's life. You've got to cut your own path. That's what it means to be an individual. And until you become an individual, accept responsibility for yourself and accept reality and know that you're here to contribute, and that ultimately a spiritual awakening helps you realize all these people that are lost and confused are God lost and confused, doing exactly what God loves to do. Forget that God is God, so that when God figures it out, it's the grand awakening. It's the greatest surprise in the world. It's the greatest surprise in the universe. In fact, it's the greatest surprise there is. It's called I am, and realizing it, right? That is the ultimate experience, is to realize who and what you really are. And it's happened to me more times than I can count. And the more it happens, the easier it is to happen, because you know how to relax and allow it to happen.
Well, I think so much gets unlocked, at least it did for me. And I would say, look, I'm 52, almost 53. In my mid 40s, I I think for so long I lived in a black and white world. And,
Mhm.
and you know that when you live in that world, you don't really learn because you already know. And when I invited curiosity in, and it was really, it came through on a plant medicine journey I was having. And I had actually gone to the bathroom and I realized I didn't know anything. Like I fucking didn't know anything. I was making assumptions about everything. In this particular case, Peyton had, in my version, was she was upset with me about something earlier that had happened. And then as I was in that bathroom, I started to unpack all of it. And I started to see that things that happened to her 30, 40 years ago could have had an impact, probably had an impact on the state she was in when I had that experience with her. And it may have had nothing to do with me. I took it on as her being upset with me, making a huge assumption.
Yeah.
And then I just started to, again, unwind all of this. It's like, fuck, I don't know anything. And it really opened me up to eventually start this podcast, to start asking questions about reality and my sources of reality and what I thought was true. And then having my own experience, and plant medicine was very helpful in that. As you know, not the panacea, but it opens doors into the investigation.
It's great for cleaning windows.
And that's what it felt like for me. It was like, oh, I just see things so differently. And I just became open to not knowing. I understood for the first time in my life, back to your point about one of the reasons for addiction is I didn't need to know, actually. I was better off not knowing, because then I could listen and be curious and then take that in and feel into my gut, my intuition. Does that feel true to me? And then again, go into the investigation and the experience of it. And I think, I've had this conversation, with one of my kids lately who's pretty anchored in black and white. And I understand that
the apple
for
doesn't
me,
fall far from the tree.
Fuck, dude. And it like,
I've got 3 of them. One of them's 45.
Well, and it's a reminder to me, right? Like I get a little bit triggered. Like, how do you not see this? It's like, oh, this is a reminder for me that this is what happens when I get black and white.
Yeah.
Because I've gotten black and white on a few things lately and I haven't gotten curious. But it's this whole thing about control too. Like black and white feels, I know I'm in control, and it's not true.
Yeah.
It's this false safety, right?
Yeah.
A lot of us are seeking safety. As I was sharing with you before we got on, my 7-year-old self is still seeking safety, even though it was in fucking bright flashing lights in my ayahuasca ceremony that my 7-year-old was seeking safety. And I've done all these things to create a sense of safety.
Yeah.
Not real safety, a sense of safety.
Yeah. But your 7-year-old's there to teach you what real safety is. But the only way you can do that is to go meet your 7-year-old. This is called soul recovery. Go meet your 7-year-old and say, Cal, I want you to know that we're 53 now, and I love you and you're safe. What is it that you're afraid of? And let's talk to each other. And then you must listen to the 7-year-old and give it the father and the mother energy that it never got, that led to that experience. And whenever we have soul loss, our consciousness stops evolving at that moment. And that fragment of us becomes a watchdog. So your 7-year-old sits inside of you looking for anything that looks or smells like the circumstances that led to that pain. And so the 7-year-old's inside of you like a watchdog, barking and saying, Cal, don't do that. Don't say that.
Totally.
Go here. Don't do. And so that creates anxiety in people. And whenever we are traumatized as children for any reasons, a fraction of us, a part of us breaks off and it becomes a watchdog, but it doesn't grow. So the 7-year-old only sees the world through the eyes of a 7-year-old. But Cal needs to go back now and hold him and ask him what he needs and give it to him. He might say, I want to throw baseball. So you need to get out and throw a baseball, or I want to draw, or I want to play with a truck, or it's crazy. But trust me, I've done this with countless patients. whenever you do what that child needs and you take the role of the father that it needed and the mother that it needed, that 7-year-old will wake up. And here's the wild thing that happens. It'll merge into you and it'll actually let go of the watchdog behavior, and all the genius and all the creativity of a 7-year-old returns to Cal, and strange things start to happen. Like within seconds of me doing soul recovery, people will say things like, oh my God, I can see color like I've never seen it before. Or I can smell things I've never smelled before. Or they'll have emotions where they were emotionally flat before.
And so those things are just like locked down.
They're locked down. Yeah. It's a protective mechanism. But you think the 7-year-old's only seeing the world through the eyes of a 7-year-old. So it's actually got the concerns that a 7-year-old would have, but it's running that information up into your adult mind. And so it's causing you to react to the world with the fears and insecurities that you don't realize are coming from an injured 7-year-old.
So true. I feel that. I've felt that. I think about whether it's this like reaching out to somebody, sending a text, and it's just like feeling like wanting it to, like there's like a strategy or something because I'm like manipulating.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel true, where other times it just flows and I feel like take it or leave it. Where this one, there's more invested in the response. The response isn't coming back. And then it's the questioning. Should I not have done that? What did I,
yeah.
Am I okay?
Yeah. Yeah. I've been through all that 1,000 times and I still have to watch, but you know, the wounded parts of us will take over the text button. the finger will, that the part of really growing up and what I teach in Spirit Gym is we've got to really look inside yourself to find. So I have a whole 10 lessons on shadow work, identifying complexes and how to heal past wounds and soul recovery, because there's a lot to learn. And so I take people through a series of exercises and ways of meditations and practices. But ultimately we to be an adult, to individuate and become whole, we have to start recognizing which Cal or which Paul is about to send the message and say, who do I choose to be now? And is what I'm about to do dream affirmative? Is it taking me and others to the place that I want to be with the level of consciousness that I'm capable of right now? And so that's where you got to stay conscious, because most of us are running on autopilot with all these injuries and all these viruses in our software that at one time protected us, but now we're like, because they're frozen in time, remember, reality is what's happening right now. So if you use the broken 7-year-old to send a reactive text message, you're going to get a text message from a 7-year-old that says, I hate you, daddy, or, it reacts like a 7-year-old. And then we look at it 3 months later and go, oh my God, I just got a divorce because I treated this woman like a disgruntled 7-year-old and she got tired of it, or something like that. Yeah. And so it takes time to actually, and it takes someone that knows what they're doing to guide you through this. And, there's an example of why I had to go through what I had to go through, because my soul said, you have to go through what you've got to help other people through, or you'll never really know how to do it. And until you do it, you won't have fulfilled the reason you came to the world. And you came to the world because you've been wounded many times, and you know that it's slowing people from realizing who and what they really are. And that's sad, because when you really do have the moment of self-realization where this God thing is no longer a theory, it's reality, it's like such a freaking mind blower. I mean, I remember the first time I really had a union experience with God, I laughed so fucking hard and I cried so hard. I ached for days. I literally laid on the ground and laughed and cried probably for 3 or 4 hours straight. And I could not stop. It was so fucking hilarious. And it was such a magical trick. And yet it hurt so bad because I thought of all the stupid things I'd done.
Yeah.
And I realized how desperate I was to find out the truth, but how I kept looking in all the wrong places. Like I hate to say it, but religions.
Yeah.
churches.
Mhm.
Like, okay, how many people do you know that got enlightened going to church? I've never met any, right? I've honestly never met any. But I've met lots of people that got enlightened, going off into the mountains and meditating all by themselves. I met lots of people that became enlightened through the intelligent use of psychedelics or plant medicines. I've met lots of people that got enlightened from having to heal from really painful injuries because they had to make a choice, do it or die. But I haven't met many people anywhere, in fact, nobody that's been enlightened through any social program that's for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, and I love you. Like Lindsay's heard me talk about this a lot on the podcast, but the archetype of the wounded healer, I mean, for me, that's most resonant for me because you've been through the thing.
You walk through the fire,
carry
baby.
the medicine of that journey. You
Yeah.
have the antidote of what that is, and you get to offer that to others, and they have to do their own walk as well.
Yeah.
But you're here to say it's worth it.
Yeah, it's easier to cross the fire if you know there's someone that you trust on the other side
That's right.
telling you it's possible and who's already done it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm 63 years old. I'm still in good shape. I can still put the hammer to the young professional athletes.
Yeah.
It confuses the shit out of them. But they realize what I'm saying must be true because here I am putting it to them.
Fucking proofs in the pudding.
I'm like, you can't deny that.
Yeah.
And they always think I'm doing drugs. I'm like, okay, well, if you know anything about drugs, then you know for sure I'm not doing drugs because I don't have any of the signs of a steroid user at all. I mean, here I am. I'll stand fucking naked for you. Have a look.
Yeah.
I have, my drugs are 4 doctors: Dr. Happiness, Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, and Dr. Movement. Until you get those right, the other drugs won't do shit but get you in trouble anyhow.
Yeah.
So anyhow.
So Spirit Gym, it was 10 years in the making.
Yeah.
Probably much longer if we really wanted to.
Well, my whole life in the making.
Yeah.
I started putting it together out of my soul told me 10 years ago that I must put together a system of legitimate spiritual development and healing that was non-denominational, that anyone could access, because people needed a path that would be as a container for any story that you wanted to put in it. It doesn't matter what religion you are. The question I always ask you is, and how is that working for you?
Yeah.
Right. You think you should get rid of all the Muslims in the world because they're infidels, or they think that about you? How's that working so far?
Mm-hmm.
You think you can get away with 5 cups of coffee a day and you read articles that tell you that's good for you? Well, look, go stand in the mirror and have a look at yourself. Your body's always telling you the truth of your choices. How's it working for you?
That's a great question.
So I just say, look, my job is to show you the kind of the principles that life works on. And it's up to you to decide how you want to use those principles. And I'm just here to whisper in your ear when you're heading for a visit with a pain teacher, but I'm not going to stop you. I'm just going to say, hey,
Someone's visiting you right now. Are you going to pay attention?
I've been rehabilitating people for 41 years. So I've got a lot of experience at what it looks like when people are about to meet the pain teacher. And I got a lot of experience of helping them through the experience of meeting the pain teacher. And some of them have met the pain teacher for the same damn things over and over and over again. And finally they're ready to wake up. So really, Spirit Gym is a set of principles, but it's an honest, legitimate path to healing. And there's nothing in there that you can deny because it's so damn in your face. It's just most people go, oh my God, you're right. It's been right in front of me all the time, but I just didn't see it.
And so practically speaking, sign up for it. And you were saying earlier before we got on, there's a weekly call.
Yeah.
How does it kind of, give us a little framework.
It's a series of lessons I built. It's online. You got 24-hour access to it. And I did what's called Spirit Gym University. So when you're in the membership, I took all the information from the 15 volumes of the book series and synthesized it down into what would be chunked out lessons on key topics. So it starts from 0, which is God, the unconditional love, the unknowable. Then it goes to Om, then it goes to myth, then it goes to being, then it goes to duality, then it goes to the Holy Trinity and explains how manifestation occurs, then it goes to the principle of four. So there's 8 different expressions of the archetype of four. Then it goes to 5, which is the Hierophant, and it also is the 5 program design factors you have to be aware of, because if you don't know these 5 factors, no matter what kind of program you're building for healing, for exercise or whatever, it's going to cause problems because you can't miss those 5 things. 6 is nutrition, hydration, sleep, breathing, thinking, and movement. So there's lessons on how to apply sound knowledge of nutrition, hydration, sleep, breathing, thinking, and movement. 7 is the principle of the soul, or the 7 chakras and how they work, and how the subtle energy systems of the body work with the physical systems, and what the soul and the spirit is, and how to have a relationship with it. 8 is the principle of self-reflection, which is all about healing. That's the 10 lessons on how to do shadow work, how to identify what Jung calls complexes, how to identify where there's soul loss, and how to go about your own healing process. 9 is the principle of a new level of awareness. So now that you're a new level of awareness, what do you got to be aware of so you don't fall off the wagon and go back to the old ways? 10 is a new level of being. That means you've made a complete jump in a structure stage of consciousness. So some of them there's multiple lessons on, like there's 10 lessons on the principle of the 8. There's 3 lessons on effective holistic thinking. So there's a lot of them. It's about 100, I'm guessing around 130 hours of training. And then I'm guiding you the whole way through. So there's meditations, there's journaling, there's actual practices you do. You can go at your own pace. Each week I have a Spirit Gym Sangha where I give like usually in 1 hour, up to 1 hour presentation on something relevant to overall spiritual development and what's going on in the world and how to deal with that. And then I open the airways to questions on anything regarding the lesson I've just given in that Sangha. And then after that, it's any problem that you want my help with. And I give you the same attention I give you as a private client who's hired me, like, Laird Hamilton, Kobe Bryant, Chuck Norris, or any of the, people that can afford to hire me one-on-one. So typically most of the lessons, the weekly lessons, run 3 to 3.5, sometimes 4 hours, depending on how many questions I get asked, how much flexibility I have in my schedule.
Damn.
Yeah, it's a lot. I commit a lot to it. And then if you want to, I run mastery groups, which is more expensive. I can't remember what the price of that is, but those mastery groups are kept in small groups. I don't like going more than 8 at all because it's just too much to manage. But then we do focus groups where like right now I have 7 in a group and I screen them all. They have to fill out questionnaires and I have to meet with them and make sure, because I don't want people that are not a good fit for the process of growth and development that the main body of the group's growing through. So, for example, I had to turn a couple away because they were still in the child archetype. And the ones that are in the group now are actually in the warrior or the king queen archetype, and they're working on evolving to the next level. So if I let child archetype in there, I would be spending so much time wiping bottoms metaphorically that the ones that are really paying for the attention that need it, which is most of the group, would be held back. But for it's all on the website too. You can go to myspiritgym.com and you can look at it there. And I have some free lessons. I'll be putting more free lessons so people can kind of take it for a spin. You can see lots of testimonials from people that have studied with me and worked with me on the website from, many people all over the world, famous people too. And so once you're in, if you pay by the month, then you get, I think, a lesson every week or up to 2 lessons a week. And as long as you complete the lesson, you can move forward. If you pay for the program up front for the year, you have complete access to the whole library of the university, which is about 85 lessons of different types on different subjects that I just outlined with the 10 principles.
Yeah.
And you can move through them based on what you think you need. Or oftentimes when I'm coaching people, I say, well, you need this lesson because it has the work you need to do. Because I can't spend hours and hours coaching one person at a time. I mean, I've got over like 220 people in the program. So they're all over the world. So we stagger the meeting calls so that it favors people at different regions of the world, and the rest, and it's all recorded. So no one will miss a lesson. They can all watch that anytime they want. And there's no start or end. You buy a year, but if you feel like you're not done yet, you want my help, you just buy another year.
Yeah.
Or you go by the month. So you can start anytime you want, and you can leave anytime you think you've got the toolbox ready to go off on your own.
Yeah.
But I think most people want someone who can really guide them and give them some honest feedback, and have somebody with that's detached from the entanglement of their life, but can give them some objective feedback so that they don't trick themselves into doing more of what got them in trouble.
Well, you're definitely the guy for that, to give that kind of detached caring where you're there for them and you allow them to have their own choice along the way.
And if they mention when they could use
right.
unlearn
15 for 15% off, folks.
15% off. Yeah. So Cal, out of his generosity, arranged for all of you to have 15% off. But I'm amazed, usually in a program like that, you lose a lot of people. They get in, it's
Sure.
what everyone else is doing, and then they drop out. But we've had an amazing retention rate, and people, I've had people say amazing things to me, like, I'm seeing the whole world differently. The most common comment, even from my book reviewers, and I got some very elite people that are really schooled, medical doctors, lawyers, people that are like got their shit together. The most common comment from the reviewers is, this is changing the way I see every aspect of my life.
Hell yeah.
This is super important.
Yeah.
And so it's exciting for me to feel, because I feel like I'm in time and on time with my life's purpose.
Uh-huh.
And so really all I want to do, I retired from taking on private clients. I reached the point where I'd seen every story and every problem under the sun over and over again. So I thought, I need to really focus on helping people on a bigger scale.
Yeah, more of a collective.
Yeah, so I can help more people at once. And I felt like with what the events in the world are, it's really time for a ground up movement, because waiting for Donald Trump or Jesus to come save us all, it's never worked in the past. It's not going to work now.
No.
And so we have to all wake up, clean up, grow up, and show up, to quote Ken Wilber. We really have to wake up, which means we have to take responsibility for having our own spiritual practice and becoming aware that there are higher realities penetrating into this one. So we need to become, just like you've experienced with ayahuasca, you got to wake up to what's creating the physical world, that there's more above your waking ego state, that you have to actually do the work to calm your mind enough so you can penetrate into higher dimensions of reality. We have to clean up, which means we have to do our healing work. We got to find the 7-year-old and the broken 6-year-old and the 5-year-old, and we got to bring them inside and love them and bring ourselves into a state of coherence so that we can actually think, feel, and understand, and not confuse ourselves. We have to grow up and accept responsibility for the fact that, nobody's more responsible for the circumstances of our lives than we are. That's personally and collectively. We got to clean up our act. We got to stop, saying yes when we should be saying no. We got to realize there's no politician that's going to fix us. We got to start managing whose money, where we put money. If we keep funding the Bill Gateses of the world, we're going to get more of it. We keep funding commercial farming, they're going to keep poisoning us. If we keep funding dysfunctional government, they're going to keep being dysfunctional. So we, showing up means taking responsibility for the power you have to contribute, and making sure you're putting money in the hands of, people that are doing good things for the world, like organic farmers and biodynamic farmers. And we have to put money in the hands of real educators, and we've got to put money in the hands of real doctors and nurses, not the fake ones, not the brainwashed ones.
Which there, unfortunately, are a lot of them.
Yeah, well, that's why we got to do this, and we've got to show up. We can't wait for someone else to come do this for us. It ain't going to happen.
Okay, so there's in prepping for this, there's 1,000 things I'd love to go down, but we don't have 1,000 hours.
Mm-mm.
So just to distill it down to one thing that I'm super curious about, and surprisingly, you're not wearing your blue blocker glasses today.
Um, well, because there's no artificial lighting in here, your light up there it may have some blue, but it's not a computer screen.
Okay, good.
And we don't want to lose the natural blue. I mean, the color spectrum is healthy for us. There was no primal man running around with blue blockers on.
No. Well, so what I want to ask you is, can you explain the importance of when we're in front of screens, TV, phone, computer, and what have you, inside generally, in most places you go inside, they've got the flickering lights. What's the importance of turning that down?
Well, the reason I wear blue blockers is because, as you know, because we were talking about it earlier, some of the artificial frequencies that are coming off computer screens are not, one, they're not natural. Two, they have negative effects on our brain. They can do things like disintegrating the left and right brain hemispheres. They can be used as carrier waves to program information that can make you crave foods or have certain biases, basically like subliminal programming, but they can use many frequencies to do that, not just blue.
This is very much like part of an MK Ultra type thing, correct?
It's also, yes, but it's also using information fields, which are basically non-local broadcasts. And the technology's been around for a long time. I mean, I was a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division, and I got out in 86, and they had guns then that they could point at crowds and make people scared. They could make them run. They could make them angry. They could make them violent and you can look up the patents for that. You can search crowd scattering devices. You can search mind control devices. And I actually printed some of the patents off. One particular one when I was doing research, years and years ago. But the first device I found that was patented was somewhere between 86 and 89. But they've perfected this technology massively. I mean, I could go into a long story about it, but then there's also, as you mentioned, effects on our brain and the release of dopamine, and it actually has the same effect as if you, for example, there's studies where if you give mice cocaine for pressing a lever, and then in the other, the option they have is food, they'll keep pressing the lever for the cocaine until they die. They won't even go eat the food or drink water. They'll just press the lever till they die. That's been done over and over again. So some of these frequencies, like some of the blue effects, is the release of dopamine, and it causes us to essentially get addicted to being on screens, they make money by how many minutes you're looking at the screen. So Google and all these guys, they're basically getting paid. It's unlike like on my podcast, if I sell a product and I get a commission, well, if I sell $10,000 of the product at 30%, then I get 30% of $10,000. But when they're doing these YouTube and all these guys, they're actually buying how many minutes they've captured you. So it doesn't matter. They want the best content on there.
Yes.
Whether it be, someone masturbating in Times Square or having wild, passionate sex with Madonna or Lady Gaga wrapping herself in animal meat or whatever the damn thing it is, the more scary, the more crazy, the more wild, they just want you on there because they just generate money. And then once they've got your attention, then they can use all their advanced technology to generate information in information fields to, make you think you're going to die without your flu shot, or you better vote for this guy, or, they're always competing, these corporations, to get your interest, your attention, and your money. So there's physical effects that are negative, imbalances in the hormonal system and things like that. There's the fact that most people stay up too late at night and they become sleep deprived, and then they start having all sorts of problems with lack of energy, which leads to the consumption of drugs, soda pop, alcohol, sugar, junk food, which just, it's a sort of like a self-perpetuating cash machine for the right people. But it's very destructive to you. So I wear raw optics blue blockers because actually Matt Maruka is a friend of mine, and he showed me some.
Yeah.
I had been wearing the ones that Ben Greenfield used to recommend. That's
Okay.
where I first learned about it. I was listening to Ben Greenfield's podcast. But when Matt came and saw what I was wearing, he goes, "Oh, let me show you the truth of those." And he pulled out a light meter and then he put them up to my computer screen, which it was on, and he put his light meter up, and it was actually letting all the dangerous frequencies in the blue range right through. And Matt pulled out about 4 or 5 or 6 other pairs. He said, "Look, let's try a bunch of them." And the only ones that actually blocked the damaging frequencies were the raw optics. So I'm like, well, that's freaking crazy. I paid like $80 for these blue blockers. They don't even do shit.
Yes.
They're letting so this is people getting scammed all the time on
There's
this stuff.
so many. I started looking into blue blocking glasses when I was on Instagram, and I fucking had no less than 15 different companies come up.
But at least, I did this. I think I might have done it right on a podcast with Matt a couple of years ago. But I saw with the light meter, which is a scientifically calibrated instrument, it's measuring angstroms of light. I mean, I used to work in advanced electronics. I know what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
And it was undeniable. And so, we have our kids wearing them when they're on screens and watching TV. And I mean, when you look at what too much screen time does to kids and adults, it's freaking bad. So blue blockers or not, we have to have very strict limits on what the kids can have, because boy, they get emotional and moody, and they don't want to do their farm work. They don't want to do their homework. They scream. I watch my kids turn into something else after about an hour of screen time.
Yeah.
And they go to Steiner school, so Waldorf school. So I think twice a year, they do a 1-month fast from media of all types, all screens. And so we just came out of a fast. And it's always amazing to watch, even with 20 minutes a day, you see the behaviors start to return, and the aggression and even things like craving sweet stuff and I want dessert. It's like almost like an addict. And so we're working now to refine how much a day and how often, like, do we need to go 1 on, 2 off, or 1 on, 1 off, 1 on?
Yeah.
Because I don't want my kids to be void of technology. You won't make it in the world if you're too technologically void.
Correct.
So even though we're wearing those glasses for the kids, the programming is so strong, and we're not letting them watch stuff that I would say is bad. I mean, they do watch some cartoony type stuff, but a lot of it's like Mana's into cars, and they play a little bit of this game or that game, but mostly like Zoe watches, she's 5, so she loves hair and makeup, and she's watching young kids show how they do makeup and do dolls. But the reality of it is these frequencies that come through there are not good for their minds. And it's pretty intense when you watch how these kids can change. You put them on a 1-month fast, and within 3 or 4 days, it's like they're not even your kids. You're like, whose kids are these, man?
I experienced, again, something similar to that in my own life, and again, I'm trying to work out like how much of an effect and, this exposure to blue light has had on me. And I know there are other elements that have kind of pushed me down this dependency road. And as I said, this summer, I was on nicotine, caffeine, cannabis, mushrooms, feel free. Like, I was on all the rides, and it was kind of all day long. And once I decided that that's not what I was going to do anymore, I kind of had my come to Jesus moment. I started to clean all that up. I started to just feel better. I had more mental clarity. I started to just understand that the cravings, alongside this, I did a parasite cleanse.
Good idea.
And I've had lifelong sugar cravings.
Yeah.
And
funguses they're powerful as hell, and they can really fuck you up.
Yeah.
I got a whole program. I developed a online training program. It used to be a series of 5 videos. It's called Healing Fungal and Parasite Infections, the Absolute Essentials, which is available at my institute, CHEKinstitute.com, and the online learning. But I show people what parasites are, and that they actually do have some benefits for the body if they're in balance, and that we actually can't function without them. Most people don't know this, but of the 100 trillion cells that make up the human body, did you know that 90% of them are not human? They're viruses, bacteria, and fungi and parasites. So we're a living garden, and only 10% of the cells that make a human body are actually human. The rest of them are all organisms that work symbiotically with the body as long as we're in balance. Your mitochondria are not human. They're bacteria from outside of you that the body learned to incorporate into itself. So there's one common example. The very system of energy generation in your body, mitochondria, is because we have a parasitic bacteria that we work symbiotically with.
Okay.
We feed it. It energizes us.
How often do you do like a fungal and parasite cleanse?
I live on an antifungal diet. I had a very, very bad fungal infection when I was in my teenage years, and it actually penetrated. There's two types of fungal infection, superficial and deep. If it gets inside your body and gets into the blood system, then it gets everywhere in your body. Then you have to be on an antifungal diet for the rest of your life. That's me. So I have to live on an antifungal diet.
What are the basics of that? Obviously, a lot of meat, protein.
No grains. You can eat corn, rice, buckwheat, and millet. Actually, that's for gluten intolerance. Sorry, I'm mixing those two. Just, you got to be careful with grains. You can't eat fruit. If you eat
some berries,
you can. You got to be very careful. You can get away with some green apples and grapefruit. Grapefruit seed extract kills funguses. So, grapefruit you can get away with a little bit, but if you eat too much of anything sweet, they learn to metabolize it, and they can then use it as a fuel. So even grapefruit seed extract, if you take an antifungal, for example, or an antiparasitic, but you keep feeding them, as the ones that are dying off are dying, the larva is learning how to eat it. So within no time at all, things that would normally kill them, just feed them. And I've been through people that years and years of working with people in my career who aren't disciplined enough to do the diet, but they feel better. So then they say, oh, good, now I can eat my chocolate chip cookies.
Yeah.
So they keep using antifungals and antiparasitics to make an excuse to have more of the stuff that's feeding them. And the next thing you know, you back yourself into a corner, and, the amount of disease that comes from fungal and parasite infections is just unbelievably high. I mean, most people have no idea. Research shows that 90% of the world population right now has both a fungal and a parasite infection, which means Mother Nature is selecting you out. If the rule is, if you're not vital enough to contribute to nature, then you get a fungal or parasite infection and she recycles you. So that's your warning. Your warning that you're not taking care of your body is a fungal or a parasite infection. From there, you'll get chronic fatigue, and then you'll start getting real serious health challenges. Then you'll get a disease, then you'll die. I've watched this cascade over and over again. So in the Healing Fungal and Parasites, the Absolute Essentials program, I show you exactly what they are. I show you the most common things you got to do, how they transmit to people. For example, probably the most common transfer medium for parasite infections. What do you think it is? I bet you'll be surprised, especially you.
Oh, well, I did hear recently that pets are the pathway.
Pets are very, very common. Now, the thing is, you also got to remember, this is why the course is so important, because I show you the both sides of the coin. Research shows that the more pets you have in a family, the stronger the immune system of the children is.
Okay.
And the less allergies you have. So kids that are raised without pets and in too sterile of an environment actually have the weakest immune systems. I was raised on a 142-acre farm of 7 in our family, wrestling and fighting in the shit and the mud.
Yep.
And, I haven't missed a day of work due to illness in over 40 years. If something gets me, I just, sit in the sauna, take care of myself, sleep a little bit more, but I've never lost a day of work in well over 40 years.
Okay, so what's the
most common medium for transferring parasites from one person to another is money.
Oh yeah, fuck, wow.
Handling money. Because one of the things that the parasites do to get you to transfer them to other places and people is they make you itch, and they make your nose itch, and they make your ears itch, and they make your groin itch, and they make your butthole itch.
So you give us
So it
just a
gets under
little
your
tickle,
nails.
and then and then you get
and
the
then
money
you start
out.
handling money, and they ride on the money. So money is actually the currency that carries the most parasites around.
Well, they're trying to get rid of money, so that would be the one benefit when they go to the CD.
We've got digital viruses
coins
already.
Yeah, that's
true. We've got digital parasites already.
Yeah, yes, we do.
Some of them wear glasses and have last names like Gates. They'll suck the life right out of you. And they ride around on your money too.
I guess one more thing in closing. How do you make sense of, obviously there's like a lot of media distraction this time of year with the election and whoever's controlling that, but like as things that are coming out, right? Some say that the whole P. Diddy thing came out right now just to draw attention away from their candidate who, is a bit of a cripple when it comes to interviews and all that. So she's been out of the limelight. But as I've dug deeper into that, I've just been fascinated at how deep this thing runs with Hollywood, with the music industry, and not that someone like P. Diddy or Jeffrey Epstein aren't completely involved, but they're almost a bit of like the patsy doing the work for others.
Yeah. So what's the question?
I don't know. It's just that there's so much in there. It's
welcome to Spirit Gym.
Yeah. It's like, there's the
light and the dark. They create together. Look, this is what it takes to have freedom. This is what it takes to have free will. If there was no dark, we wouldn't know what light is. And if there was no light, we'd have nothing to illuminate the dark. Because of all the stuff going in the world, I was really bothered by all this, even at my level of understanding. And I went into deep meditation and I asked my soul to connect me directly to God consciousness. And I said, look, with infinite creativity and infinite intelligence, there must be a better way for you to self-realize than have to have all this evil. I said, it's very hard for me to watch what's going on in the world right now. I said, I need you to tell me why. Why all the pain, all the loss, the death, the loss of children, everything. And I sat and waited for an answer, and the answer came back. And the answer that came back was short, clear, concise. Paul, you must understand, evil upholds the good. If there was no evil, there could be no good.
Does the evil need to kind of up level because we get a bit numb to a particular level of, we kind of get used to it? Like, oh, this is just
evil. Remember, evil is any choice or behavior that is antagonistic to life. If you take the word live and read it backwards, it's E-V-I-L. L-I-V-E backwards is E-V-I-L. So to live evil is to antagonize the evolution of consciousness. It's like saying, I don't want to grow up. I don't want to have responsibility. I don't want to realize that all love comes with responsibility. I just want to do what the fuck I want to do. I want to screw who I want to screw. I want to have money without working for it. I want to be a child. I want to be a grumpy child that gets what they want always. Even if it hurts people, I don't care. So, Lao Tzu says in the Tao Te Ching, the people always create the government. Or, he says the government always reflects the people because the government's made of people. So I think the reason we're seeing what's happening in the world is because enough of us have been so conditioned to death and to lies and to manipulation that we're unconscious of how much of it we're doing ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jung says something very powerful. If you don't meet the unconscious on the inside, you will meet it on the outside in the events of your life, and you will call it fate.
Mm-hmm.
So what is he really saying? If you don't go inside, which is exactly what Spirit Gym's for, and look at where you're bullshitting yourself, where you're lying to others, manipulating yourself and manipulating others, where you're creating illusions instead of truth, where you're using love, power, money to manipulate other people to get what you want, or where you're using your mind and your power and your social media to get attention that you're unwilling to give yourself. In other words, if you're constantly looking for more likes and you're creating illusions like photo manipulation programs, to the degree that you are using your power, your money, your love, your time, your energy, and your attention to get an external validation for yourself that should be coming from within, then you're creating illusions, which is the domain of Lucifer. Lucifer is the great master of illusion. And so because we have evolved our technology about 10 levels beyond our morality, now what's happening is digital technology is allowing us to change our environment so rapidly that we're creating a mirror of ourselves that's so powerful, but we keep wanting to blame everybody else for it. You know, look at what Bill Gates' father was all about. He's the head of a eugenics program. You know, Rockefeller, look, like the apples don't fall from the tree, far from the tree. But if you say, okay, how many of our parents are trapped in religion that's not healthy? I mean, I know many Catholics that say spare the rod and spoil the child and beat the living shit out of their children and think that's the work of God. I watched during the Gulf War, soldiers writing, this one's for you from Jesus on warheads, right? So we're using war, we're using religion to justify acts of atrocity against other people without even looking to see if they really are bad. I mean, all the things they said about Saddam Hussein turned out not to be true.
Correct.
Okay, it was all just a big show. But if we put money into that, and we sign on to that, and we buy into that, and we say they're the bad guys, and we go after them and all this shit, and turns out that they weren't true at all, think of all the millions of lives we've destroyed. So what I'm saying in a nutshell is what's going on in the world right now is our shadow is coming to life so we can see it. We are manifesting the dragon of our unconscious mind in the flesh. We are now seeing what happens when you put enough money, energy, power, and technology into the dark side of ourselves. The problem is we keep blaming somebody else for it. You know, so as one of my spiritual practices is, you know, Donald Trump can drive me absolutely nuts. As much as people love him, they're just looking for a daddy to rescue them, right? You know, you don't need too many brain cells holding hands to do a little research on Donald Trump or any of these guys to find out. It doesn't matter which way you go. None of these people belong in the White House. That's why I was really wanting to see Robert F. Kennedy get in there, but even he's got some stuff. I mean, he's pro-Israel. I mean, I'm like, you know, so that shocks me, but the reality of it is, we have got to have a ground up movement. We've got to start taking responsibility for what we do with our money. We got to take responsibility for the fact that if you believe in God, then there's nothing but God here. So, you know, killing people of other colors, races, and creeds for any reason without first doing a lot of work to negotiate and a lot of work to find out how we can support each other and find out what our common needs, dreams, and values are and how we can compromise, which is what the political system's supposed to do. But really, we got just a bunch of raping, pillaging, you know. So really, all I'm saying is we are looking at the embodiment of our shadow. And the question is, how far down the rabbit hole do we have to go to say, okay, I realize I must do my part. I must use my heart to feel what I know. And I must ask myself, what would love do now, and act affirmatively.
Mm.
To be a spiritual adult, you must use your heart, not your head, to feel what you know. Only the heart can deliver justice to the head. And you must make it a commitment to ask yourself whenever you're facing challenges in your life, with your wife, with your friends, with your coworkers, with whatever it is, and go into meditation and say, what would love do now? And as challenging as it is to act the truth of that out, that's the difference between an adult and a child. And so we are facing the childhood need for instant gratification, lying, telling stories, and creating illusions to get what we want at the expense of others. And when you do that worldwide on this scale, reality delivers the truth to you. And here we all are.
That takes it all back to reality. And by the way, like, I didn't really have a question, and you answered the non-question with exactly what I needed to hear. Like that, like everything you said was just so resonant of like, this is me trying to project onto others. Like this is their shit and they're evil. And there's a level of that. And it's like, I know that that's my work to do. And this is why you're here with Spirit Jim. Fucking
welcome to
bam.
Hotel California.
Yeah, that's right.
You can come anytime you want, but you can never leave.
Yes, sir.
The only way you get out of here is you live and love so fully that if you find yourself surrounded by yourself, when you die, you'll be okay.
Yeah.
But most people can hardly stand being alone with themselves for even a few minutes. Isn't that true?
Oh, buddy, that's where those stimulants were coming. And it was that alternate, experience that I was looking to escape, being with myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so now that, I'm learning to love this version of me.
Me too. And, people have all this Christian end of days and judgment day stuff. But, what I found out many times is the only judge there is when you die is you.
Mm.
It's you. But this time you're God.
Yeah.
And you say, how did I do?
Yeah.
Was I true to myself? Not just the little self, but the whole self,
Yeah.
right? The little self is your sense of I-ness. The capital SELF is everything that supports you.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is we all need each other. Look, you like Chinese food. We all like food from all over the world. We like music from all over the world. We like entertainment from all over the world. I'm a man. I would be lying if I said I wouldn't like to make love to every beautiful woman from every color of skin in the world. Because to me, they're all gorgeous and I just want them all.
Mm-hmm.
There's a man in me that just loves beauty, right? So if you said we're going to get rid of all the black women in the world, I'd say that's a very big mistake from an artistic perspective.
Sure.
That's a terrible mistake because I want to make love to them all.
Yeah.
And if you said I'm going to get rid of all the black musicians, I'd say that's a terrible mistake because I love them all.
Yeah.
If you said we're going to get rid of Jamaican food, I would say that's a terrible mistake. If we're going to get rid of Chinese, don't do it. So we got all these stupid games of race, color, and creed, but we all actually need each other.
Yeah.
I mean, people drive around in cars made by the very people they say they hate and they're going to go to war to. When you actually get down to it, if people would just wake up even just a little bit and realize that all this division is something they're just buying into, so gullible and so foolishly. But actually, we need each other. And we have everything we need to make this planet beautiful again. We've got more than enough money. If we would just share resources with each other, have a common dream together, which just taking care of the planet would be a real good start. Joseph Campbell said before he died, Bill Moyer said, what do you think the next myth will be? He said, I'll tell you what I know it has to be. It has to be a planet-based myth or we're all going to die. And it's true. If the myth that emerges from right now is not Earth-centric, we are fucked. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't have to give you an accounting of how far down the rabbit hole we are with the oceans, with this topsoil, with the skies, with the waterways. I mean, corporate America has destroyed the world, put it that way. And it's just time to wake up, clean up, grow up, and show up. And it's time to use your heart to feel what you know. We all know the truth if we just listen to our heart. And if we did what love would do now, we'll be okay. The only other choice is the devil. So there you go. It's up to you.
Well, I can't wait to dive much deeper into Spirit Gym. And like you said, we'll have all this linked in the show notes, but myspiritgym.com, unlearn 15 for 15% off. Yeah. Where else can people find you? You'd mentioned your
my podcast is Spirit Gym with Paul Chek. My institute is chekinstitute.com. Do you want to learn more about me personally for things like my biography and who I am and you know, all that stuff? paulchek.com is sort of a hub for people that want to interview me or just know more about me. My YouTube channel where I have like, I don't know, 1,200 videos I've done for the public for free is youtube.com/Paul, Chek live, Paul Chek live. Those are the main sites, chekinstitute.com, my YouTube site, paulchek.com, Spirit Gym with Paul Chek podcast, myspiritgym.com for the mentorship training program that I developed and launched in June or July. I think July, I think right at the beginning of July when we launched it. There's enough there on any one of those to keep you busy for the rest of your life. I mean, the Chek Institute is a 5-year academy program that's multidisciplinary. So there's medical doctors, osteopaths, chiropractors, personal trainers, strength coaches, acupuncturists, you name it. I founded that institute in 1995. We've trained over 63,000 people worldwide. I have an entire worldwide network of Chek professionals that can help you heal. And there's a load of great information on chekinstitute.com. My book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, is world famous. Published it. Me and Penny published it. Sold over 230,000 copies. It's still going strong. It just had its 20th anniversary printing. Damn. Did a special edition. It's been on the top of bestsellers list on Amazon many times. And it's still as true today as it was then. It's been revised a couple of times now. So that's How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. The Chek Institute has my Eat, Move, and Be Healthy online training program. We've got Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 1, which takes all that information and teaches you what you need to know for your family and for yourself. It's a 3-day training program if you do it live, but it's online. Mm-hmm. And that's the gateway into our professional holistic lifestyle coaching department development. So what you want a career, if you want to do a career path as a holistic lifestyle coach, and you go from HLC 1 to HLC 2 to HLC 3. So that's the training. That can be done independently of the academy as well. The academy students do all the high performance and corrective exercise, and then they do all the holistic lifestyle coaching, and they also go deep into the psyche in their final year of training. So they know how to get into people's stories and understand all the things we've been talking about and what to do about it. I honestly have put so much stuff out. Sometimes I can't even remember my own resources.
I think that's going to give people a nice place to start. There's something for everybody there, for sure.
The podcast is a great place to because I get as many like you, as many great minds as I can. Yeah. If you really want to, take responsibility for yourself and say, I'm ready to take charge of my life and really learn legitimate spiritual development that's truly holistic, then myspiritgym.com is the training program where you get the same kind of coaching I give the people that pay me a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
So there's lots of options.
Well, I'm excited to dig deeper and to join you on that journey.
We're on it every day together. It's just waking up and realizing that, we're all, the world's a big little place, right? And so, just to close, I'll leave you with a question, all of you. Some people see themselves as insignificant, but I'm going to ask you a question, Cal. If you change your story, if you heal that 7-year-old wound that you have, will that affect your wife's story?
Yes.
Will it affect your children's story?
Most definitely.
Will it affect your friends' stories?
Yes.
Will it affect your podcast?
Absolutely.
Okay, now you do the imaginary math. If you change your wife's, your children's, your friends, and your podcast guest story, how long does it take before that ripples around the entire world?
I mean, not long.
Well, there's a thing called 6 degrees of separation.
Yeah.
Which means you're only 6 people from anyone in the world. If you actually want to reach anyone in the world, you can do it within 6 intelligent attempts. It's well known. So if each of us is really only 6 degrees of separation from each other, 6 people away from each other, if we use our heart to feel what we know and do what love would really do now, every one of us can change the entire world. And that's why I say, this is why Lao Tzu said, if you want to heal the world, heal yourself. And that's true. If we want to make the world a better place, we can do it for ourselves and know that everyone's watching. And Rumi says the greatest teacher is the silent teacher. Why? Because everybody's watching. If you're living from your heart, they can't miss it. And the greatest lover is the silent lover. Because as you grow spiritually and you're more in your heart and in your love, you're broadcasting that out of your energy field everywhere you go. So you're walking through the supermarket healing people without doing a thing, right? So we've got to stop being children waiting for Jesus or Trump or daddy to come fix the world, because it's never going to work and it can't work, because then we just become codependent children again. And we've got to be the silent teacher and the silent lover. And the good news is we're all going to die. That's a guarantee. So we might as well die knowing that we did our best to leave the world a little better than how we found it. And that's what's inspired me for a long, long time. Just knowing that if I can just do my best to leave the world a little better than how I found it, I can't be responsible for the whole world. I can't be responsible for Exxon Valdez spilling oil or whatever. But, I can do the best I can do to share what I've learned in my lifetime with you, your audience, with my friends, with my students, and hope that they do the same. And I think if there's one way to create some peace in your life, it's just know that you're going to be okay. Because if you die into your heart and it's beautiful, it's a safe thing. But if you die into your heart and it's full of lies, manipulation, and deceit and trickery, then you get to meet your God. And so I would rather meet the God of my own creation than the one that I've been programmed into thinking I have to worship because everybody else is doing it.
That's right. Well, amen to that. Thanks for being here. I love
pleasure.
you, man. It's
Love you too.
been a while since I've seen you. It's been great to share the space with you today.
Yeah. Thank you. It's so nice to come to, your other house that I went to was mind-boggling and stunning. I'm like, okay, Cal, when I walked into your first house, like, Cal's got to meet Jason. These two are like brothers.
Oh, yeah.
And then when I came to this house, I'm like, because Jason already said to me, he said, Paul, wait till you see Cal's cool house he's got. You're going to love it. And so I'm out here doing Tai Chi out there waiting for you. And just like, oh my God, this is a great place to do a podcast. It really, the vibe here is very much like my home. So I was like, wow, this is cool. I dig it here. I wonder if Cal's going to mind if I just stay here. I'm going to be his gardener.
Hell yeah. Awesome.
So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, brother.
Lots of love.
Yeah. Me too.